The Vampire Tales, Called by Midnight, Fae Wilds Series, Book 8, written by W.J. May, copyright 2023 by W.J. May, narrated by Kathleen Starr Hall. Nothing good happens after midnight. Stuck between a devilish imp and a vampire with cold eyes and a hot body, Hollie isn't sure whether to laugh or to cry. Right now, the vampire might be the lesser of two evils, but she can't seem to spend enough time with him to confirm her suspicions. Things go from bad to worse when she attracts the attention of a powerful woman who is bent on meting out punishment. But when two princes of darkness join the fight over her, Hollie isn't sure even a vampire mate could get her out of the trouble she's in. Prologue. His eyes traced the path of the slug as it crept along the wall beside him. His face senses picked up every twitch of its muscles and the traces of slime it left behind, even in the dimness of the cave. As good as his eyes were, his ears were better. "I'm surprised you didn't wake every beast in these mountains with your stomping," he said as his companion rejoined him, settling on a boulder nearby. Although her face wore a sour expression, he thought that she enjoyed his teasing too much to complain. "There are no beasts to report, so there," she said with a smug tone, then stuck her tongue out at him. Phaedra might be one of the most talented warriors his people had ever known, but she was a goofball at heart. "Just wait," he replied, and his eyes flicking to the small crack they'd managed to wiggle through to access their sanctuary. The cave system they'd stumbled into was a mystery to them, and he'd urged Phaedra not to get them lost. "Would you rather be overrun by leeches?" she'd snapped while shoving him low and pushing him into the crevasse. "Because that's what happens if we aren't well hidden by nightfall." Now they waited to find out whether they would survive the night. "Sin. If they come, they come," she told him, her voice resigned. "Watching that crack isn't going to make a difference." He looked up at her gorgeous face and tried on a smile. "She always seems to know how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. I wish I had the same talent when it came to her." Phaedra nodded her head. "That's better. Look at the bright side. At least we're not sitting in the dark." She looked down at her bare arms, which were giving off a faint glow, the same as his. Fae were able to summon light when needed, and their skin could admit light as well. It was a trait of his kind, along with pointy ears, superior speed and agility, and love of all things beautiful, including Phaedra. It was true he'd been in love with the Fae female for as long as he could remember. They'd been friends since childhood, running through the forest of Valencia, chasing the wildlife they found there. Phaedra was more skilled than he at catching them, but he'd never once seen her harm any of the creatures she'd captured. That was not to say that Phaedra wasn't fierce. He'd seen her stake a vampire without blinking and rip the horns off a demon for looking at her sideways. As a prank, she'd once shaved a werewolf during a full moon. "Don't ask me how I did it," she'd said with a mischievous look in her eyes, afterwards while passing him a piece of his foul-smelling hide as proof. "Let's just say he's learned his lesson when it comes to making fun of a Fae's ears." Being stuck here in this dank cave with her wouldn't be half bad, he thought, if it weren't for the horde of vampires hot on our tails. They were supposed to be the hunters. It was the reason they'd traveled to this far-flung realm to root out a horde that had been terrorizing the people of Valencia. Somehow they'd managed to construct a portal into the realm without attracting the attention of the Valencian royal family. Things had been different with the royals since the disappearance of the princess, after the revelation of a prophecy that had branded her the harbinger of the apocalypse. The queen was inconsolable, her king obsessed with protecting his lady wife from her despair. Their son, Prince Eddard, had taken charge of their absence, and Sin wouldn't call his rule anything other than adequate thus far. On the prince's watch, vamps had snuck past Valencian defenses to claim Fae victims. When an entire village was drained in one night, Eddard finally chose to do something about the invaders. Phaedra and he had been dispatched to gather intelligence once their portal was discovered. But, as usual, my partner got a little overzealous. They'd found the horde's lair and staked it out, watching the vampires' movements secretly. Overconfident to a fault, Phaedra thought they could take the horde out themselves. One day, 2 dozen stakes in and out before nightfall. This wasn't the first crazy mission she convinced him to tackle with her, and he'd hoped it wouldn't be the last. Things had gone well at first. Locating their coffins wasn't difficult. Like most leeches, they longed to sleep in the cold ground. On the lowest level of the lair, a dark crypt in mouldy stone held their coffins. Sin knew that when they cracked them open, they'd find each one full of earth, and the coffin's owner. Phaedra had been eager to rip off the lids and start staking vampires. Sin's heart thundered in his chest, not because he was worried about the leeches hurting him. It worried him the way Phaedra threw herself at trouble without a shred of fear. One day he might not be there to have her back. It was that thought that frightened him enough to keep him up some nights. The first coffin had revealed a bald leech, his eyes closed and body stiff, as was the way of those who bedded down at sunrise. Sin knew the coffins they found wouldn't belong to the chief. They were reserved for underlings, younger and weaker vampires who served their chief and followed his or her orders. The chief, however, was generally much older and stronger and no longer needed to bed down in earth to regain strength. All the chief needed was blood, and lots of it. Fae blood, he thought, his heart hardening. This horde had come to their realm, had killed their people. All he felt as he watched Phaedra stake the leech through its cold heart was satisfaction. Good riddance. They made their way through the crypt, Sin passing his partner's stakes and Phaedra driving them through the chests of the sleeping vampires. Each one she touched would never open its cursed eyes again. They'd made their way through at least half of the horde when the crypt around them started to rumble. "What is that?" Phaedra asked, wiping the black blood off the arm she'd used to drive a stake deep. "The chief." Sin shook his head. "He should be too weak during full daylight to draw on enough power. It's got to be something else." The sound of footsteps on the stone steps that led down to the crypt made his eyes widen. "It can't be vamps," he said, drawing close to her and pulling out his onyx blade. "At least, not young ones like these." Phaedra stood at the ready, a stake in one hand and her sword in the other. "Whoever it is, I'm excited to meet them." There was a feral smile on her face, and in that moment he knew the woman had captured his heart for all eternity. No vamps had descended the stairs. Instead, they'd found themselves facing a contingent of demons who set upon them as soon as they realized the Fae were responsible for exterminating so many of the pests. "You'll pay," the lead demon had said, his twisted horns sprouting with his sudden burst of anger. Skin mottled red, he pointed a finger at them. "Catch, don't kill. Our master will enjoy skinning them alive too much to deprive them of that treat." The demons had done their best to follow orders, and with their strength and ability to teleport, it had been a close thing. He'd cut several demons to shreds while admiring his partner's ability to run roughshod over the enemy. In the end, they'd left enough wounded to escape. "A secret demon security force," Phaedra had puffed, running full speed toward the ridgeline where they'd hoped to find safety. "Demons and vamps aren't known to team up." "Coin can be pretty persuasive," Sin replied, "and elder vamps are known to sit on piles of coin like dragons." "There," Phaedra had said, pointing out a dark crack in the stone before them. "That might be a cave. We can hide out until morning." They'd pushed their way through until finding this chamber, where they currently sat, waiting for the inevitable. As the hours crept by, Phaedra fidgeted more, unused to sitting motionless. Before long, she was pacing the small space, biting at her nails with a black expression on her face. "They'll sniff us out, follow our trail, and rip our heads off," she grumbled, her hand tightening on the sword that swung from a belt on her hip. "Is that fear I hear in your voice?" he asked, genuinely interested in her answer. A scowl was all he got. "It's not as if we have backup here," she said, gesturing wildly. "We're the advance force. No one is coming to help us, and we missed our portal back to Valencia." They'd been instructed to return to the spot where they'd left and read the scroll tucked in his jacket pocket. It had to be on the spot where they'd appeared, or who knew where in the web they might end up. "If I remember right, it was your idea to go staking leeches. We were supposed to gather intel and return home. And let the royal guard have all the fun, she replied, rolling her eyes. I don't think so. Sin chuckled, admiring her spirit. Oh, come on, Fae. You don't actually think the Horde Chief and whatever underlings we left unstaked are really a match for you, do you? She ignored him, continuing her pacing. Sin rose from the rock where he sat and stepped into a path. Putting a hand on her shoulder, he looked down into her eyes. We saw their chief, remember? The night they made an attack on the capital. You can't honestly tell me a leech with a bowl cut is really going to spell the end of the ignoble Fae of the Fae. Don't call me that, she said, shoving his hand away before breaking into a laugh. His haircut is ridiculous. Did you see that tail coming down in the back to past his waist? It reminds me of a rat. The only thing worse than a leech, huh? He leaned in, his hand returning to cup her arm so gently he wondered if she could even feel it. Tell you what, if he does come after us tonight, I'll cut that tail off and strangle him with it. Phaedra smiled up at him, the glow in her skin increasing. In that moment she was lovelier than any sun, moon, or star in the multiverse. I want to kiss her. No, I need to kiss her, now, and until the end of time. Her eyes turned liquid, and for a moment, Sin thought she wanted the same thing. He inched closer, his eyes on her plump lips. He felt her arms start to tremble and knew this was the moment. Until Phaedra spun away from him, starting up her pacing once again. Bad haircut or not, we can't underestimate the vampire fiend, especially with his own private demon army, and he'll be at full strength. Sin held in a sigh, moving back to the cave wall and leaning against it, restraining the disappointment inside him like a dam holding back the deluge. What's a Horde Chief, his gaggle of underlings, and a demon host to you? I've seen Phaedra the Fearless tackle wimps like that in the blink of an eye. She arched a brow at him, but he could see a grin toying with the corners of her lips. And what about Alessander the animal? Everyone still talks about the day you slayed those rogue minotaurs that had escaped the travelling menagerie. How many were there? At least 10, right? Sin laughed, shaking his head. Alessander the animal? Phaedra shrugged. Would you prefer Sin the Sinister? There was only one minotaur, and I didn't slay it. I captured it and returned it to the menagerie. It was a little too long in the tooth and complaining about missing tea time. It was her turn to burst out into laughter. Not as impressive as I made it sound. You definitely need to let me tell the stories of your victories. Otherwise, everyone will wonder how I got stuck with such a lame partner. You're killer enough for both of us, he replied. Just look at the way you handled those vamps earlier. You didn't bat an eye at the sprays of blood springing from each stake. Blood is my business, she said tartly. Now you sound like a leech. Her lip compressed in a grim line. Never. They'd never managed to turn me before I snapped every one of their pitiful necks. And what about me? Sin said. I'm the lame one, correct? What if they managed to turn me? What would you do if your partner was a leech? He'd asked the question as a joke, thinking they'd continue their comic conversation. But Phaedra was deadly serious with her answer. I would stake you, cut off your head, and burn your body. A chill went through him, even as pride filled his chest. This woman is perfect for me. She's everything I want, everything I need. The night passed with no vampires finding their hiding spot. The next day they trudged back to the spot where they'd entered the realm, marked off with a ring of stones. Sin read the scroll that transported them back to Valencia, although a part of him missed their quiet interlude on the run from the Horde. Looking back on that time as he stood on the top of a hill overlooking the scrum of brush and scraggly trees in the rough, Sin scowled at the darkness. Night was his realm now, and his partnership with Phaedra had long since been destroyed. It turned out she was much colder and more methodical than he'd thought. After Sin was turned, Phaedra hadn't staked him. She'd left him chained up underground, not even granting him the gift of death as a remembrance of what they'd once been to each other. As Sin stood there mourning the loss of his former life, his anger solidified inside him. All the love that he'd felt so easily had turned to black hatred that festered like an eternal wound. Still, sometimes the ghost of his former feelings for the Fae female returned, like tonight as the moon waxed above the dark forest. I must stomp it all out, he told himself. Every memory of her, our time together, of the way I made her my universe, only to lose her the moment those fangs entered my flesh. Sin turned away, retreating into the shadows. Soon he'd be rid of Fae of the Fae, once and for all. Chapter 1. She was becoming all too familiar with the stomach-dropping whoosh that accompanied being dragged across realms, so when Hollie landed, it took her only a second to wrench herself away from the grip of the man beside her. If he is a man. Hollie took 2 steps away, running her hands through her hair to soothe herself in the wake of another devastating twist of fate. A second before, they'd been in the gloomy forest of Samothrace, home of the witches who had set out to battle against the vampires she'd seen as the bane of her existence these past few months. Except things had changed recently, leaving Hollie's feelings in a confusing muddle. She'd convinced Jude, the creature who'd whisked her away moments ago, to take her to the vampire in order to warn him of impending doom. Too late. They'd watched the battle. She hadn't known how to feel in the moment, simultaneously rooting for the vamp while also hoping he didn't hurt any of the witches who were only trying to protect their home, and her as well. Maz had been magnificent, fighting off the threat while managing not to harm his foes. But when he'd caught sight of Jude, his expression had turned black. Hollie thought it was because Maz didn't like to see his supposed mate with the handsome Jude. The vampire had found them in the tavern previously and had reacted badly, to put it mildly. But instead of addressing Hollie, he'd lashed out at Jude, threatening him with torture and revealing a shared history she'd been unaware of. Who is Jude? She wondered, her thoughts racing as she knew she had only seconds to figure out what to say to her companion. And what is he? Not a warlock. Jude had said as much himself. Imp. The word flashed in her memory. That's what Maz called him. But what exactly is an imp? Images of mischievous creatures no bigger than a salt shaker flying around on bat wings and causing chaos filled her head. But they didn't match the attractive, well-dressed male with blonde hair and hazel eyes staring at her now. She'd promised to take up his invitation to travel with him on whatever adventures he'd had in mind, but there was no way Hollie intended to live up to her bargain now that she knew it was made under false pretenses. However, she also knew she couldn't afford to cut ties with him entirely, since he was her best chance of getting back to Samothrace or even Wisconsin. Trying on an apologetic smile, Hollie took a deep breath before addressing her companion. I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression, Jude, but I'm afraid I won't be able to accompany you on any adventures at the moment. Maybe you could just take me back to Samothrace? The image of the scowling vamp filled her mind, and she quickly amended her request. Better yet, you could return me to my home realm. A blonde eyebrow rose, a smile toying with Jude's lips. You're the one with the wrong impression. My name isn't Jude, it's Dallin, and I've known who you are since the first moment I ran into you. No other reason could have dragged me away from my winning streak at the tavern on Samothrace. I'm betting on a much bigger payoff. The greed in his eyes startled her. Hollie swallowed, wondering what this revelation would mean. Can't things just go the way I want them to for once? Back in Watoma, the most difficult day she could imagine was the day before Christmas, when last-minute shoppers filled the downtown streets, snarling up traffic, and every customer who popped in seemed to expect some sort of holiday gift in exchange for paying their premiums. Not to mention Christmas is the time we always missed Mom most. Now she'd happily go through a whole year of Christmas Eves in exchange for transport back home. Forcing herself to focus on the situation at hand, her eyes returned to the imp. Dallin was muttering to himself, looking around at their position and seeming to be trying to determine their orientation. Her heart was beating harder, her mind almost refusing to believe that they were once again thrust into circumstances that Hollie could neither understand nor control. Hollie knew she'd landed deeper in the morass that had plagued her since she'd trusted the wrong person and ended up far away from her small hometown. The memory of that fateful night flashed in her mind, the night when everything had changed. If she was being honest with herself, they'd changed the night she'd seen a pair of crimson eyes flash in the alleyway beside her office. Although Hollie hadn't known it at the time, it was the first time she'd laid eyes on the vampire, but far from the last and perhaps the least traumatizing of their encounters. Less than a week later, she'd been on the small campus of Watoma's Technical College. Walking out of the night class she was taking to bone up on her business accounting skills. Her father had pestered her before his death to improve her bookkeeping skills, as he'd intended to turn over the insurance business he'd built to her someday. Hollie hadn't had the heart to tell him that she didn't plan to spend her entire existence in one tiny town, but her fear of hurting his feelings meant she'd enrolled to spend 2 nights a week fighting to stay awake as the instructor droned on about numbers and software options. Such a glutton for punishment was she, Hollie had even continued to attend the class after her father's demise, unable to drop out despite her lack of interest. Pushing her way out through the glass double doors, she'd paused to listen to a voicemail from Kelly, her not-quite friend, who spent 5 minutes talking about a date gone wrong, finishing up the message with a request for Hollie to take her out for drinks and dinner to make her feel better. Rolling her eyes, Hollie had tucked her phone away, then rubbed her arms with her hands as a cool breeze blew past. Looking around, she noticed that most of her classmates had hurried out of class like she had, and as she turned toward the sidewalk to the parking lot, the lights in the building had flicked off. She hurried her steps, but a moment after she started walking, Hollie heard footsteps behind her. Unable to help herself, she glanced over her shoulder, hoping to find another student staring at a phone or wrapped in a hoodie and ignoring her. Instead, she'd seen a tall figure with a long black coat and ice-blue eyes. He smiled at her, and she saw the tips of 2 pointed canine teeth peeking out from beneath his top lip. Although never a fan of horror movies, she couldn't help but feeling like she'd inadvertently stumbled into one. Before she could increase her pace, the stranger was beside her. "You're in danger," he said, his voice low, his accent unfamiliar. Eyes wide, Hollie wasted no time assuming his words were a threat. She took off running into the shadow cast by the 3-story library that stood between her and the parking lot. Cold hands grabbed her suddenly, carrying her to the exterior wall of the library and pressing her against the hard bricks. "Don't run from me," he muttered, his eyes flashing red. "Never run from me." She trembled, fear brutalizing her. "Let me go," she whispered, too afraid to struggle. "Never," he said softly, leaning in to peer into her face. "You belong to me, and I am your destiny, your eternal mate." Just remembering the moment brought chills. Hollie had seen his fangs then, had seen the single-minded determination that had kept the vampire in pursuit of her for days on end. She'd expected some horrible crescendo, had expected fangs to plunge into her neck and end her life before it had really gotten started. 100 regrets had raced through her mind, and his face had moved closer to hers, the intensity in his expression overwhelming her. Then, out of nowhere, he'd suddenly straightened, letting out a word she couldn't understand, its delivery reminding her of a curse the vampire released her. She'd closed her eyes in relief, and when she opened them again, he'd been gone, a shaky hand resting on her chest where she could feel her heart pounding. Hollie had let out a heavy breath and wondered if she'd hallucinated the whole thing. Perhaps the loss of her father, the pain of his absence, coupled with her conflicted desire to leave the life he'd given her behind, had pushed her over the edge. The reality of the encounter had been proven moments later when a figure rushed up to her. He'd been about her age, curly, disheveled hair, and indiscriminate clothing, making her think he was a fellow student. "Are you okay?" he said, his face full of concern. "I saw that man push you up against the wall before rushing off." I don't know," she'd responded honestly, relieved to know that someone else had seen the exchange, that she wasn't losing her mind in the wake of her father's death and her crushing grief. "You better come with me," the student had said softly, gently putting a hand on her elbow to guide her back to the sidewalk. "We should report this." "Are you sure?" she asked quietly, not wanting to relive the moment with a couple of disinterested campus security guards. "I mean, nothing really happened. I'm sure," he'd told her with a decisive nod. "You got off lucky. What if he's looking for his next victim and she's not so lucky?" "Okay," she'd agreed, letting the Good Samaritan lead her off into the night. And what a fool I was. "It's this way," the imp formerly known as Jude said, bringing her attention back to the here and now. He gestured off to the left, but Hollie didn't bother to look in the direction he pointed. "What's this way?" she asked, then shook her head. "And what is all this about knowing who I was from the beginning? What do you mean?" Looking frustrated, Dallin pursed his lips. "I suppose I have to spell it out for the dense little human, huh? I guess it's quicker just to show you." He lifted his hand in front of her to snap his finger, and in an instant his appearance shifted. No longer was he the irascible blonde in fine clothing. Hollie gasped, taking in the figure that had just appeared in her own memories. A mop of curly hair, a faded T-shirt and jeans, and a helpful expression combined to form the figure of the Good Samaritan who'd comforted her after the vampire's attack. "Surprise!" the imp called with faux cheer. "You!" she cried, the pieces falling into place. "You're the one who took me off Earth the first time." "Uh-huh," Dallin said, nodding and whirling his hand in a circular motion to encourage her to speed up her realizations. "I was following Maz, wondering what in the web could have distracted him from dragging me back to a prison cell on Pluto. Imagine my surprise to find him stalking a wisp of a woman in the human realm." Putting her hands on either side of her head as if her brain might fall out of her skull, Hollie was rocked by his revelation. She'd followed what she thought was a Good Samaritan that night, trailing him around the library. He'd paused in front of the building, giving her a bracing smile and putting his hand on her elbow to help guide her through the door. "You can do this," she remembered him telling her. But when Hollie had stepped through the library doors, instead of the wide wooden circulation desk she expected to find in front of them, she'd found herself inside an expansive tent, a sweltering heat hitting her and knocking the breath out of her body. "You took me to Ahrimanabad." The realization that the imp had been the one behind her initial abduction floored her. "He's the one who got me into this world-hopping mess, and here I am in his clutches once again." Hollie wasn't sure what the future held, but there was one thing she was now certain of. I've got to get away from this blasted imp, because whatever he's got planned, it can't be good. For once, Hollie would rather be in the grip of the fearsome fanged vampire. Chapter 2. Anger flashed inside her like the detonation of a bomb. Although she knew the identity of the stranger who'd taken her off-world, she didn't understand Dallin's motivation. Why take me to Ahrimanabad? What was the point of dragging me off-world? "You're a valuable commodity, one that I plan to trade in order to make my little situation with Samael go away. But things didn't happen quite as I expected." He trailed off, rubbing his face. In that instant, the disguise he'd adopted to trick Hollie into trusting him back on Earth dropped, and he was once again Jude. Or Dallin, I suppose, is more accurate. "You traded me to the auctioneer," she recalled. "Didn't that get you out of your situation?" "It got me out of a situation," he corrected peevishly, "but not with Samael. Once I'd gotten you stashed away, I'd planned to hire transport to Ahriman's lair." What he meant by stashed away, Hollie recalled, was shoving her in the direction of two foul-looking guards without another look before heading off in the direction of a circle of animated figures across the room. Meanwhile, the guards had bound her hands and chained her ankle to another captive. That captive had turned out to be Phaedra. "I got sidetracked by a friendly game of stones," Dallin admitted. "One of those blasted demons must have been cheating, because I ended up with a hefty and much more immediate debt." Hollie let out a groan. "You traded me to pay off your gambling debt? A debt you didn't even have before we landed there?" She couldn't believe what she was hearing. They nodded. "It was only supposed to be temporary. I was going to come back later and steal you back, but a raiding party had whisked you away into the desert, and Maz was closing in, so I sort of lost track of you for a bit." This story just keeps getting better. Those raiders dragged me across the desert. I faced sandstorms and monsters to fight my way off that cursed world. And here you are, fine as ever. In fact, you've likely improved. Adversity builds character, after all. Dallin's cocky retort broke the last lock on her restraint, and Hollie exploded in rage. She shoved him, then struck his arm, mindlessly hitting out at him for everything his antics had ended up putting her through. The imp blocked her easily, then used his ability to disappear, reappearing a few feet away. "Let's everyone calm down now," he said warily, holding up his hands. "All of this will be easier if we continue as friends." "Friends?" Hollie let out a groan to the sky, hands clenched into tight fists in front of her. "We aren't friends. I don't even know who or what you are, and I have no intention of continuing anything with you. Take me home." "I can't do that." The smile that had seemed almost permanent vanished from his face, his features turning cold. "I need you. You're my ace in the hole, the only leverage I have. You're coming along with me, whether you want to or not. So let's pretend we're friends, as I said, and things will go easy. But make no mistake, if you don't choose easy, things will get hard." The words hung in the air between them, and some of her anger faded, replaced by tendrils of fear working their way into her belly. He's got a goal for me, and I'm pretty sure I won't like where this is leading, but until I know more, I can't figure out how to get myself out of this predicament. "Why Ahrimanabad?" "Because its ruler is one of the princes of darkness, and it would take a prince to vanquish a prince," Dallin frowned. "I've fallen in Samael's bad graces, tired of kowtowing to that self-important ass. Lord Pompous can do his own dirty work. I'm striking out on my own." "Sounds like a gamble," she said, her wordplay intended. "Pitting brother against brother. What makes you think you can pull it off?" "Ahriman is a collector, and he won't be able to resist adding you to his collection." "Because I'm human?" Hollie was confused. She remembered the raiders talking about the prince's collection, but it was Gilly, the wingless fae, that they thought would be the prince's prime target. "Humans are a silver piece of sextant," he replied, waving her words away. "You're the vampire's mate, Samael's precious servant, invulnerable to nearly everything, except for one thing." Dallin didn't have to say what that thing was. "Humans don't have eternal mates," Hollie countered. "We get divorced, cheat on each other, ghost one another." Her defenses were as high as ever, considering how things had gone down on Samothrace and before. Dallin ignored her. "This way," he said, striking off in the direction he'd pointed out before. "And hurry up. Things are moving quicker than I'd like, and we can't afford to waste any more time chit-chatting." Hollie stood her ground, arms crossed. Sighing, the imp gave her a look, disappeared, reappeared right behind her, and gave her a solid shove. "Let's get moving." Stumbling forward, Hollie managed to catch her footing, following in line behind him. "If you can teleport, why not take us straight to wherever we're going?" she grumbled. "Because I can't quite remember where we're going," he shot back in the same irritated tone as hers. "Once things look familiar, I can lead us right to where we need to go." His head swiveled, a neutral look on his face. Despite his expression, Hollie could tell that he was struggling to get his bearings. For the first time since their arrival, she turned her attention to her surroundings. It looked similar to other realms, including Earth, with manicured lawns, trimmed trees, and, in the distance, wooden and brick structures. "You've seen one realm, you've seen them all," she thought, her emotions continuing to affect her attention. They were in a garden of sorts, with linear paths of white gravel and symmetrical rows of plants and flowers lining the way. A few yards away, a stone wall climbed to shoulder height, an orderly line of fruit trees beyond the wall. Everything was as neat as a pin, the neatest garden I've ever seen. Hollie leaned in to sniff at a light bluebell of a flower hanging off a leafy bush. She paused, confusion filling her face. There's no scent. She tried another bud and another, but no fragrance filled her nostrils. Maybe in this realm the flowers don't smell. she thought, then froze, leaning in close to the little bluebell. A look of wonder bloomed on her face. It looked like a flower, like a garden of flowers, from far enough away, but when she looked closely she could see that the petals weren't composed out of plant matter, but instead tiny wires and cables no bigger than a strand of her hair. Hollie let out a gasp when she noticed tiny pulses of electricity running through the wires, giving the faintest sheen to the bud. She straightened, suddenly realizing that electricity was pulsing through every living thing in the garden. "Where are we?" she asked, amazed. "Bellefonte," Dallin replied, distracted. They walked through the gate and onto a tree-lined boulevard of cobblestone. "We'll make for the cluster of buildings down there," he said, pointing into the distance. "That's where we should find our destination." Hollie followed the imp, unable to take her eyes off the nature around them. The trees were larger cables, she saw, twisted wires pumping power into them like breath itself. It was all artificial and yet somehow completely real. But the marvels of the plant life couldn't hold her attention as they reached the outskirts of the city before them. From a distance, the city resembled any other of the rustic townships she'd visited during her time in the realms occupied by Fae. The structures had a medieval vibe, wood, stone, plaster, and brick being the building materials of choice, but it didn't take long to realize that cities in Bellefonte were not as old-fashioned as they appeared. They landed on cobblestone street with houses on either side, most 2 stories and several with thatched roofs that gave a neighborhood a quaint fairy tale feel. That is, until a metal-forged form sped around the corner and barreled toward them. In the place of legs was a single wheel about a foot in diameter. Above the wheel sat a copper trunk that became a torso as it climbed. Arms ending in C-shaped clamps hung from narrow shoulders, an ovoid head with simple features completing the creature. "That's a robot," Hollie blurted out, perplexed. The appearance of the rolling machine seemed out of place in its surroundings. At least it did until it zoomed up to the door of one of the houses and let out a beep. The door, instead of swinging open on hinges propelled from inside, slid open with a soft whoosh, allowing the robot to pass inside before whooshing closed again. Yes, Dallin muttered dismissively. "Many wonders to see." As had happened in the garden, Hollie's eyes began to adjust after a moment, and she began to notice the hidden layers of advanced technology that underpinned the world around her. The roofs, for instance, weren't thatch as she'd thought. What looked like yellow straw were actually tendrils that reminded her of some sort of fiber optic cable, the ends of which gently looped back to connect into the house. The plaster walls seemed to vibrate gently with the same electrical pulses as the plants had, and where brick or stone was used instead of plaster, the mortar that joined the materials pulsed instead. Hollie's eye followed one pulse, catching it near the stone foundation and tracing it as it made a light blue path between the bricks, zigging and zagging until it reached the roof line and entered one of the yellow tendrils there. Her attention was so consumed that she almost bumped into a mechanical man whose lower half was comprised of 4 spider-like robotic legs. His upper half, however, was attired in a fancy topcoat and cravat, a decorative monocle hanging over a bushy mustache. "I beg your pardon, milady," the mechanical man said, blowing out a burst of air that made his mustache ripple, then removing his top hat with a flourish and bowing to her. Hollie giggled, delighted by the robot's politeness. "Not at all. It was a mistake." Giving her a nod, the robot returned the hat to his head and started off again, the motion of his legs making his top half bob like a buoy in rough seas. She watched him stagger off, biting her lip to keep from laughing. "I'm glad you're enjoying yourself," the imp said, appearing at her shoulder, a tight expression on his face. "But could we hurry it along a little? I'd like to get away from prying eyes sooner rather than later." His tone dried up any remaining laughter. "You haven't told me yet where you're taking me. I thought your goal was Ahrimanabad." "It is, but I can't just stampede there now that Maz knows what my goal is. He's certain to be waiting for us to attempt to reach Ahriman's palace. So if we can't go to Ahriman, we'll have to find a way to bring him to us." "Bringing a Prince of Darkness to us, huh? That doesn't seem too promising. Hollie didn't like the way that sounded. The imp did little to inspire confidence. Whatever he's getting me into is bound to be trouble. Best thing would be for me to escape as soon as possible. Dallin seemed to sense the direction of her thoughts, because he looped an arm through hers, setting the pace as they marched down the street. There's an intermediary here, a back channel to the prince, if you will. If I can just remember where his workshop is. His words trailed off as they reached an intersection. The imp's head craned around, looking in every direction, trying to recall the object of their search. It's got to be around here somewhere, he said, then let out a curse. I don't know how you humans do it, walking around everywhere like savages. Hollie looked at him sideways. It seemed the imp wasn't accustomed to having to rely on his limbs instead of his powers of teleportation. She didn't exactly feel bad for him, especially now. The world around them was fascinating, and she was enjoying their walk, despite knowing that at the end of it she'd be traded to some sort of evil demon prince to be used as a pawn in some sort of sibling rivalry. Just then, a robot of the one-wheeled variety sped past toward a multi-story building. For a moment, she thought it was bound to crash right into the structure. Its speed too fast to stop in time. Hollie's jaw dropped open in shock when she saw the robot's wheel catch a contraption near the foundation that allowed its wheel to transfer from the ground to the wall. The robot zoomed vertically up the building, disappearing into a wide window on the 4th floor. An idea unfolded itself in her mind suddenly, and Hollie had to hide a grin. I think I've just figured out how to give Dallin the slip. Chapter 3. Did you see that? Hollie called out, amazement in her voice. See what? Dallin asked, annoyed. He was peering down a street that crossed the one they were on, a look of bafflement on his face. There's another one, she hooted, pointing at the robot chugging up the side of another building nearby. That thing is quicker than the entire Packers' offensive line. The imp followed the direction of her finger, then rolled his eyes. You're talking about the robots? They're not so fast. He dismissed her, going back to trying to determine the correct direction to head in. I disagree, she said, pretending a sense of wonder that would hopefully provoke the hellspawn's competitive nature. I think maybe someone's jealous. Her tone drew his attention again. Jealous? Of a clockwork creature with circuits for brains? Scoffing, he shook his head and turned back to his work. Now, let me concentrate, will you? Hollie shrugged. Says the guy who uses magic instead of his own 2 legs to cross a room. I bet you couldn't climb that building so quickly without using your precious powers. Dallin paused, his body going rigid. He turned, and she saw a shine in his eye that told her that her words were having the desired effect. The imp's eyes flicked to a wide 7-story building where one-wheeled robots were rolling up and down, entering and exiting through a multitude of openings in the structure's sides. Hollie watched him watching the robots, her mind attempting to find just the right goad to push him into a wager. When's the last time you won a race? She asked, looking him up and down. You look a little long in the tooth, so I would gamble that it's been a while. Long in the tooth? He asked, his tone cold. Is that one of your quaint human expressions? Hollie nodded, smiling sweetly. It means old, and I bet you're ancient. She was careful to sprinkle as many words related to gambling into the conversation as she could to prime him. She had to stop herself from shouting in joy when it worked. Hands on his hips, Dallin stared down at her. What is it worth to you if I beat a robot in a race up that building? Scrolling her features, Hollie pretended to give the question some thought. Honestly, I don't think it's possible without magic. The imp's lips compressed into a tight line. Let's say it is possible. What would I win for my victory? Hollie stuck her hands in her pockets, already knowing they were empty. She then patted her dress, then ran a hand through her hair. Relief flooded her when she realized she was still wearing earrings. They were cheap, made of fake gold and crystal, but the imp didn't know that. I'll tell you what. You beat a robot up that building without magic, and I'll give you these. Dallin watched as she took off her earrings and held them in the palm of her hand. A moment of regret bit at her. The earrings had been a gift from her mother, ones Hollie had begged her to buy when she was much younger. She still wore them to remember her mother, so although they might be cheap, they were very high in sentimental value. It doesn't matter, she told herself. The minute Dallin is distracted by this stupid race, I'll escape and keep the earrings. The imp stared down at the two small, shiny things in her hand and shrugged. Good enough, I suppose. You wait here. Hollie tucked her earrings away in her pocket and watched as Dallin approached the building, standing in the way of one of the approaching robots until it stopped to bow politely. She couldn't hear what the pair were talking about, but soon enough the robot bowed again, then waited patiently when the imp returned to her side. He's agreed to a race to the top, Dallin informed her. You give the signal, then keep a close watch. The first one at the top wins. Hollie nodded and followed him back to the robot, who greeted her with another bow. Once they were arranged before the building, she took her place in front of them and lifted her arms. I'll count down from 3, then drop my arms. That's the signal to go. Arms above her head, Hollie started counting, realizing that a few people and about a half a dozen robots had stopped to see what the commotion was. 3, 2, 1! With a shout, Hollie dropped her arms and the race began. She whirled to watch them take off toward the building, Dallin seeming to grow claws along the way. He leapt onto the side of the building a second before the robot reached it and started barreling upwards. Hollie's eyes widened. The imp is fast. I've got to give it to him, she thought, then told herself to stop being a dolt and run. As swiftly as she could, Hollie ran from the building and toward an alleyway that led out on the next street. Forcing herself to ignore the wondrous sights she was racing past, she looked for opportunities to put some distance between herself and her captor, knowing she wouldn't have much time to find a place to hide until she could locate another way out of this realm. She passed a shop decorated with images of exotic locations, tall mountain peaks, dense aquamarine forests, and beaches with sand shining like jewels and froze, then backtracked, ducking inside. Her chest was heaving, her pulse jumping like a frog on steroids. Welcome, an electronic voice with a friendly lilt said. The voice belonged to a woolly automaton in a gold-plated shift dress with hair made out of golden metallic strands. She walked forward, one of the rare variety of bots she'd seen so far that had 2 human-like legs. How can I help you this afternoon? Hollie looked around the shop, a small space with a few sparsely filled shelves and only one rack that held clothing in refined prints. Fearing she'd made a mistake, she frantically searched for a place to hide herself. Eyes on the door, she scurried to crouch behind the clothing rack while motioning toward the robot clerk. The clerk obediently followed, leaning over to address her. Is there something I can help you find, madam? An exit, Hollie hissed. A way out of here. The clerk politely pointed in the direction of the door she'd come in, but Hollie shook her head. Let me rephrase. Is there some way to leave the realm here? A portal of some kind? The images on the outside of the shop had her hoping that this might be some portal hub or some sort of interdimensional travel agency, but she was beginning to think she'd misinterpreted the signs. The clerk looked at her, its mechanical face blank of expression. After a moment, its chassis adjusted, and the robot's head jerked as if she were flipping a lock of hair over her shoulder. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. She gestured to the rack. I can show you something in your size, something that will make you a true whiz-bang. A whiz-bang, huh? Hollie said, disappointment deflating her. Let me think it over. Why don't you go back to whatever you were doing, and I'll call you over when I'm ready. She was hoping to get some space from the robot, who was looking at her attentively. It would only take a glance from someone outside to look in and see that the clerk was talking to someone out of sight. Dallin might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he can still slice me without much effort. The robot's chassis shifted again, and she lifted her golden arm to push back another lock of hair, reminding Hollie of a model playing coy during a photo shoot. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. She picked up a dress off the rack and held it toward Hollie. This one would bring out the pink in your cheeks. I've got to move, or I'm a sitting duck. Better get to waddling. Without straightening, Hollie Crouch walked over to a pot that was filled with a dozen of something that was between a feather and a long thin leaf, in a color Hollie hadn't seen before, something between purple and blue. Figuring she was safe away from the merchandise, she hoped that the robot clerk would lose interest in her and go away. The clerk watched her go, her head cocked and golden metal eyebrows raised. After a moment, she trotted along after Hollie, still holding the dress. If you would prefer one of our tickle teasers, I can show you how to activate them. She reached toward one of the bluish-purple feather leaves, but Hollie grabbed her hand to stop it. I would prefer if you would leave me alone, she growled in frustration, keeping her voice low and her eyes on the door. Outside the shop's open entryway, she could see people and robots passing. Any moment now, one of them could be Dallin, and this clerk is a dead giveaway. The clerk repeated what Hollie was coming to consider her catchphrase. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. Gently extracting its hand, the clerk tried again to pick up one of the feather leaves. Infinite battery life, she said with a helpful nod. You or the teasing tickler, Hollie said in a sardonic tone, then waved away the clerk's correction of the device's name. She grabbed the dress out of the robot's hand and held it up, blocking her body as she stood. You got a fitting room for me? Right this way. The clerk beamed, then started across the room to a black velvet curtain, which wasn't velvet after all, but very fine wires woven together like threads. She pulled back a portion of curtain and waved Hollie inside. Then the curtain closed. Hollie let out a sigh of relief. She tossed the dress on a hook and leaned against the back wall, giving her heartbeat a moment to slow. The moment was short-lived, however, as the curtain began to adjust itself, contracting in so that Hollie's head and the tops of her shoulders were visible. The clerk smiled helpfully. How's that fit? Hollie let out a groan that came from her soul. I haven't had a chance to try it out yet, she gritted between her teeth. You're worse than a needy puppy. I'm sorry, I know, you aren't sure what I mean, Hollie finished lamely, her eyes shooting once more to the door. This time they met a familiar face who scowled back at her. One moment, Dallin stood on the threshold of the shop peering in, and the next he was in the fitting room with her. Cute stunt, he grunted, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her back through the curtain. And for your information, I totally won that race. Sure you did, Hollie said, waving to the clerk, who looked confused. I'm afraid it didn't fit, she called back, hoping to end the exchange with the annoying automaton at last. We have several other sizes and colors, it called after her, taking a couple steps in their direction, but Hollie didn't have a chance to answer because they were suddenly whooshing away from the shop, leaving the robot far behind. Landing suddenly, Hollie looked around her, wondering where the imp had teleported them to this time. At least one good thing came of your ruse, Dallin told her. While I was looking for you, I found the workshop. Chapter 4. In front of them stood a multi-story building that was set off from the others around it by a square courtyard. Unlike the other structures she'd seen during her time in the township, it seemed to have grown almost organically, each floor and addition tacked on almost as an afterthought, giving it a chaotic appearance. A large iron wheel turned slowly, half of it disappearing into the building. Thin green smoke burped fitfully out of several thin chimneys in the slate roof. Come on, Dallin said, tugging her toward a wide wooden door lined in iron. It slid open as they approached. After entry, Hollie blinked at the dim interior, lit only by a few artificial flames and glass orbs positioned high on the walls. We're here for Gresh Follett. At first she wasn't sure who the imp was speaking to. The entry chamber appeared empty. Dallin's words, however, prompted something to start in motion, and she could hear the clink and clang of machinery at work. From the wooden floor rose a rectangular box that continued until it was eye level, then stopped. The box opened itself, revealing a mechanical creature that reminded Hollie of an octopus, but with even more legs. Each leg was engaged in activity. Buttons were pushed, knobs turned, and Complicated patterns were recorded by the little metal tentacles. Each motion was so well practiced that the legs were little blurs, and Hollie couldn't keep her eyes trained on them for long. "Gresh Filet," the octo-thing said in a metallic voice, its eyes swishing back and forth while it cogitated. "He is in second floor, workroom D." The contraption around the Octobot let out a whir, and suddenly a piece of parchment appeared. His tentacle snatched it up swiftly and passed it over to Dallin. The imp retrieved it, and the box closed, returning to its place hidden under the floor. "Well, that was efficient," Dallin said, admiration in his voice. He consulted the parchment, which turned out to be a map. "This way." Hollie followed him through the maze that he'd called a workshop. She wasn't sure who or what Gresh Filet might turn out to be, but she figured she had to behave herself long enough to figure out another way to escape. Maybe this Gresh will have a compassionate streak, she thought. Although, if he's a friend of Dallin and Ahriman, I won't hold my breath. They climbed some stairs and wound down a crooked hallway, finally coming to a stop in front of a door that looked like it was made out of ivory. A D was carved into its surface. "Here we are." Dallin wasted no time opening the door. The imp put a hand on her back and propelled her into the chamber before him, shutting the door once he was on the other side. Hollie's eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. The central player was obviously the graying man in a brown leather apron, standing at a workbench in the center of the wood-paneled room. His patchy hair stood up every which way, his eyes shielded by a pair of metal-rimmed goggles that turned in their direction. Squinting at them, he seemed to recognize Dallin, then instantly dismissed him, going back to whatever he'd been working on. Around him stood two humanoid robots the size of children who watched patiently as the old man lit the end of what resembled a welding torch and leaned toward a contraption that Hollie couldn't quite make out from her angle. Dallin set off toward him, calling out, "Gresh!" as he did so. The old man started, causing the arm holding the torch to twitch. "Flatulent vapors, you've broken my concentration," he cursed, then extinguished the torch in a hurry. "Defensive positions, everyone," he called out, his voice calmer than it should have been, because a sudden burst of electricity shot to the ceiling, its flash blinding Hollie instantly. She blinked, unable to see the gale of activity around her. Defensive positions. The word sank in, and she ducked just as the sound of something whooshed overhead and hit the opposite wall with a bang. Her vision started to clear, but it was still too hazy to make out exactly what was going on. "What's happening?" she called, hoping to avoid whatever hazard she wasn't able to see. "Looks like sprites of some kind," Dallin said from nearby, then let out a grunt. He spoke a moment later from the other side of her. "Electrified sprites." Sprites? The image of the tiny creatures from folklore filled her mind. Surely they couldn't be too dangerous. The sound of electronics shorting out filled the air, followed by the acrid smell of smoke. "Hellfire!" she heard Gresh shout, followed by a stream of curses. "That was my second-best robo-grip!" Blinking again, Hollie could finally follow the pandemonium unfolding around her. One of the robots that had been standing next to Gresh a few moments before was a smoking hulk on the floor. The other bot was swatting at a pair of little blue figures that looked as if they were made of lightning. They hovered above it, pausing a moment to nod at each other, then swooping down to simultaneously press their hands against the round head of the robot. Electricity flashed, and the bot made a hideous popping noise before listing over to the side and beginning to smoke. The sprites hugged each other in glee, then rounded on Gresh, who was busy digging in the drawers of his workbench. "I'll need a distraction so I can get something to capture the blasted buggers," he called to Dallin, his eyes glued to the advancing enemy ranks. "Say no more," Dallin said, dodging the sprite that kept tipping toward his head, getting more and more frustrated as Dallin teleported out of reach each time. This time, Dallin shot across the room, snatching a dusty curtain from beside a dust-covered window and yanking it out of the wall. Appearing between Gresh and the pair of attacking sprites, he tossed the curtain over them, dropping them to the ground. "Help me tie them up," he shouted to Hollie, who hung back, less than eager to engage with the electrified creatures. Dallin scowled at her, then yowled when one of the sprites shocked him through the curtain. Hollie looked from the imp to the old man, whose back was to her. Both were too busy worrying about the sprites to keep a close eye on her. Time to take my shot. She sprinted toward the door, putting together a plan on the fly. If I can make it into the hallway, maybe I can manage to find a place in this funhouse to hide long enough to figure out my next step. The door was only steps away, but she skidded to a stop, suddenly realizing that one of the nasty blue creatures was floating in front of it, rubbing its hands together with an evil grin on its tiny face. She stopped only a couple inches away, but the sprite started closing the distance immediately, its hands held out toward her, malice burning in its minuscule blue eyes. If that thing touches me, it might be lights out. Didn't take much for them to short out the robots, and they're more durable than humans. Fear drowned her, and Hollie started to retreat slowly, but the sprite wasn't going to give up its chance. It shot forward, grabbing for her, and Hollie flinched away, eyes closing, everything inside her waiting for the touch of death. A gentle hiss sounded suddenly, and she felt the breeze of something passing in front of her. Whatever that thing was, it blocked the sprite's attack. Hollie's eyes flew open to see a red blur hit the sprite with something resembling an illuminated fly swatter. A shower of sparks ignited, and the sprite was no more. Heart pounding harder than the hooves of a galloping stallion, Hollie let out a gasp of relief. The red blur rushed off, propelling itself through the air on jets that left twin trails of steam in its wake. It pummeled the curtain with the swatter device, and the curtain fell flat.
"Got them,"
it said, then floated gently to the ground.
"Well done, Wendy,"
Gresh said in a sarcastic voice. He slammed the drawers of his bench, rounding on the little red robot.
"You could have mentioned that you had the energy deflector already. What do you think I was looking for in there?"
he asked, gesturing toward the bench.
"Sorry, Gresh,"
the bot replied, then held the device out to the old man.
"I was whittling down the population of galvanic gnats living in the East Corridor when I heard the commotion. I came right away, bringing the deflector with me."
Gresh grabbed the deflector from Wendy's small hand and tossed it on the bench. Wendy, for his part, tucked his arms back into his little red body that reminded Hollie of a child's gumball machine until only the little white hands remained. His dome-like head turned in Hollie's direction, and he wheeled toward her along the ground.
"I'm afraid we haven't been properly introduced. I'm Wendy Buckets."
"Nice to meet you, Wendy," she replied in a shaky voice. "I'm Hollie. I'm with Dallin." The bot looked at Dallin, then back at her.
"I'm sorry,"
he said softly. It took her a moment to realize that Wendy had made a joke. "Funny," the imp said, proving that he found it anything but. "I see you're still the same old interfering windbag as before. Never was a robot more aptly named."
"I'm afraid hospitality can be lacking at times, but if there is anything I can do to make your visit better, please don't hesitate to ask."
A sequence of colorful lights set off in the bot's spherical head to accentuate his words. Hollie was surprised by the pleasant greeting. "I don't suppose you have a portal here that can take me out of the realm?"
"We have several options that might—"
Dallin appeared, wrapping his arm around the robot's head to muffle his response. "Good try," he told Hollie, while dragging the bot toward its owner. "How do you shut this thing up?" Gresh ignored him, instead coming over to look Hollie up and down.
"How'd you convince this attractive young thing to throw in her lot with you?"
he asked, peering closer into Hollie's face.
"She's not one of those hyper-realistic love companions I've been hearing about, is she? Excellent craftsmanship if she is."
"I'm human," Hollie said, taking a step away from the old man, "and I didn't exactly volunteer to come on this little field trip."
"Human, eh?"
Gresh said, sniffing heavily.
"If you say so."
He turned his attention back to his bench.
"Stinking sprites springing up when you least want them around," he grumbled,
straightening items while complaining to himself. I hate to crash your pity party, Dallin said, letting go of Windy and approaching the old man, but I'm in need of a techno-mage with a connection to our favorite Prince of Darkness. Gresh let out a bark of unhappy laughter.
Eager for me to parley with Samael and convince him to shorten your leash?
Dallin ignored the jibe. Talked to Araman lately? Gresh shrugged his shoulders.
He visited to check out my progress on the automatons a decade or so ago.
The little red robot had rolled back over to Hollie's side and began a quiet running commentary on their conversation for her benefit.
Araman of Aramanabad, one of the 5 princes of darkness, is the owner of a vast collection of beings from...
I've heard of the collection, she interrupted in a whisper. But what are the automatons?
Gresh built an artificial manticore for the prince centuries ago, and Araman liked it so much he commissioned a full 20-figure animatronics display that the boss has been working on for decades already. By the time he's finished, it will be the most intricate work of its kind in the multiverse. Completion date is currently estimated at 300 years.
Hollie let out a low whistle, impressed at the time scale involved in the Technomage's creations. How long did it take you to build?
What are you two doing here besides interrupting my experiments and setting me back days of work?
Gresh cut in, his patience gone.
Get to the point or get out. See what I mean about the hospitality around here?
Windy said softly. Somehow the old man still heard him and fixed him with a glare. I need to talk to Araman, Dallin explained. Can you contact him for me?
Why not contact him yourself?
Gresh said.
I'm a busy man, and so is the prince. Neither of us suffer unnecessary interruptions easily.
This is very necessary, I assure you, Dallin said. As riveting as the conversation was, exhaustion was starting to catch up with Hollie. Too much had happened in the past several hours, and there had been precious little time to sleep or eat, or use the bathroom. She leaned in, whispering to the robot, Could you point me in the direction of the ladies' room?
Right this way,
Windy said, heading toward the door. Not so fast, said Dallin, appearing suddenly to block their way. I'm not letting you out of my sight, given that you're a flight risk. Suit yourself, Hollie said, fed up with the imp's treatment. She turned to the robot, her voice full of false cheer. Excuse me, Windy, but you wouldn't happen to have a mop and a change of clothes handy, would you? I'm afraid I'm about to make a mess in the workroom.
Let her go to the washroom,
Gresh griped.
I'll set a protocol that makes sure Windy keeps an eye on her for you. Windy Buckets, he said, addressing the robot in an official-sounding tone. You are to stay by Hollie's side at all times. You are not to let her escape the workshop. Comply. I will comply, Windy said, his tone shifting to a more robotic voice before shifting back. Right this way, young lady.
The door whooshed open and Hollie followed the robot, giving Dallin a smug look as she passed. Chapter 5. The heat of the day lingered as the twin suns of Aramanabad made their way below the horizon. There were countless places that Maz would rather be, but there was only one place that mattered now, and that place was close enough that it took everything inside him not to go there now, leaving his allies behind. Only the knowledge that he would be a fool to take on Araman alone kept him in his place, outside the city walls, trailing behind 3 females who were arguing again about the best course of action in the next few minutes. The fortified city of Acutix looked much as it had the last time he was here centuries ago. Beyond the tall walls lined in broken glass, he knew they'd find rows of squat, sand-colored buildings filled with suspicious hellspawn who always seemed to be itching for a fight. The city was the last one before the wilderness surrounding Prince Araman's private territory, and it had been built to withstand sieges. Withstand them it did, for millennia, until the enemies who sought to face off against the ruler of the realm figured out that subterfuge was their own opportunity of taking the city. That made for an overzealous city guard and a citizenry who were quick to turn on any hint of betrayal. Maz didn't know what they hoped to accomplish in the city, but his Fae traveling companions seemed to think it was the appropriate starting point in their search for their missing human companion. He looked out from under the wide-brimmed black hat he'd added to his ensemble before leaving for the Hell Realm, knowing he'd need to take extra protection against its 2 sons. 1 is bad enough. 2 is pure overkill, he thought, wondering what Ahriman had been thinking when he'd been shaping his kingdom.
"We're going inside," he heard Phaedra tell her companions. "We already confirmed that this is the most likely landing spot for staging a trek to Ahriman's lair."
They'd had a discussion that had seemed to drag on for ages to Maz, who was eager to go after his mate. He couldn't blank his mind of the image of this self-satisfied imp spiriting her away back on Samothrace. It drove him with single-minded purpose to find her. And to punish Dallin. If he thought our boss's tortures were bad, just wait. He won't even remember Samael's name when I'm done with him. Unfortunately, the Fae seemed plodding in comparison to his own zeal. Back on Samothrace, Phaedra had related her own experiences on Ahrimanabad when she and Hollie were on the run from raiders. He'd confirmed her supposition that Acutix was the closest city to the Prince's Keep and grudgingly agreed to the witch Cass opening a portal just outside the city when Phaedra wouldn't allow him to transfer them all to Ahrimanabad, but instead on using the witch as transport.
"I don't trust you, and I don't foresee that changing," she told him plainly.
He would have preferred appearing as close to Ahriman's fortress as he could get before hitting the block that prevented teleporting within the area around the prince's private domain. Using his prodigious speed, he could have reached the keep an hour afterwards, but the women seemed to think stampeding toward the fortress would only end in imprisonment or worse. Following my own instincts is what's gotten me into this situation. As much as it pains me to admit it, the Fae must have something going for her. She managed to get herself and Hollie away safely from this realm before, even when the odds were heavily stacked against her. Maybe she can pull it off once more.
"Look,"
he caught her saying, silencing Taylor with a wave.
"We've agreed that I'm taking the lead. I'm the one who's been here before, after all."
"So have I, numerous times." Maz managed to hold his tongue, but that didn't mean he wasn't frustrated by the situation. He'd dwelled on a hell realm for ages, had visited many of the 17 hells, in fact. And if anyone here has an affinity for so-called evil creatures, it's the one who survives on blood. Ruffled feathers aside, he admired the warrior Fae's confidence.
"If the imp is here, someone has likely seen him. It can't hurt to feel things out in the city before setting off for Ahriman's lair."
Without waiting for a response, Phaedra set off toward the city, stopping a few feet from the closed gates. She called out to the guards stationed atop the wall there.
"You there, open the gate. My companions and I are seeking accommodations for the night." "That's so," the guard said casually. "Where are you arriving from?" "Off-world," she replied, not bothering with artifice. "We have coin to pay for the inn and business in town. Open the gates." "Business, is it? Do you have the proper permits?"
Phaedra looked up at him with an irritated expression.
"Permits? You're joking, aren't you?"
Maz held back a groan. It was clear Phaedra, though full of confidence, was out of her depth.
"Permits are required for any lawful business in Acutix," the guard responded. "Are you saying you have unpermitted business?"
The Fae's eyes narrowed. She sensed the obvious trap.
"Of course not. We have gold to buy all the required permits, but we'll need to get inside and we'll stop by the permit office in the morning."
Maz's eyes had been trained on the guard since the beginning of the exchange, which meant he was the first to catch the surreptitious gesture from the guard. His right hand had crept behind his back and was motioning to someone behind him. Eyeing the descending twilight around him, Maz took a risk, taking a step out of the shadows of the rock outcropping where he'd been standing and approaching Phaedra from behind. He tapped her gently on the shoulder as she continued to make promises about permits and proper paperwork to the guard. Ignoring his touch at first, she finally whirled around to insist that he not interrupt her.
"I'm handling this,"
she told him through gritted teeth, then flashed a satisfied grin when the sound of the gates clanking open rang out in the night. The 4 of them faced the gates, and Phaedra's wide smile quickly soured when the lifting gate revealed the form of a dozen armored dev guards who was standing at the ready on the other side of the gate.
"Throw down your weapons and surrender," called the guard from the top of the wall, "or face the wrath of the Architect City Guard."
Rage filled Maz. He knew that every second he had to spend defeating the guards was a second wasted. His mate was somewhere out there, abducted by an impudent imp, and who knew what kind of danger. If Armand gets his hands on her, I may not have a chance to get her back. He might be millennia old, but even with his insane strength, he was no match for a Prince of Darkness on his own. Running on instinct, he traveled instantly to stand behind the guard on the wall. Before the man knew he was there, Maz's hands were grabbing his head and yanking it forcefully to the side, snapping his neck in an instant. He was back on the ground before the man's corpse landed in front of the contingent of dev guards. The lead dev howled, spittle flying from his lips around his yellowing tusks.
"Lay them low,"
he shouted, and the guards charged forward.
"Brace yourself, ladies,"
he called, then launched forward with claws itching to rend and tear. Before he reached the line of enemies, even with his preternatural speed, something beat him to the punch. In fact, that something was a giant hand conjured from the air and guided by the motion of the witch Cass. The purple fist slammed into one of the dev, knocking him to the ground before unclenching to slap him repeatedly, keeping him grounded. Maz leapt on the nearest dev, but was quickly bucked off, the creature's strength nearly a match for his own in his tired state. The vampire hadn't fed since the battle against the witches, and his reserves were running low. Using his traveling ability, he flashed back before hitting the ground, this time managing to circle the dev with his legs and grab his throat. He plunged his claws in deep, a thick spray of blood shooting upward. He shoved his face in it, lapping up the stream and feeling his strength starting to return. The Fae, meanwhile, were teaming up against their opponents, their graceful acrobatics almost beautiful as they landed blows and stripped flesh from bones. Grateful to see that his companions could hold their own, Maz focused on his own efforts, setting out to immobilize as many guards as he could as quickly as possible. If we stay too long, we'll only attract additional attention. A roar of pain brought his gaze to a pair of dev who had caught on fire. They were slapping at each other, hoping to put the flames out while Cass rained down the inferno on them. A glance in the direction of the Fae revealed a small pile of bodies around them. Things were going better than expected, and at this rate, in a few moments, they should be able to enter the city and hopefully manage to hide before the next contingent of guards could find them.
"Eat wood, foul leech!"
The cry turned his attention back to the dev nearest him, who was charging with a spear angled straight at his heart. Maz traveled, landing behind him and snatching the spear from his hand. He broke the weapon over his knee, then used the halves to pummel the guard with a series of furious blows that were faster than the eye could see. The dev dropped to his knees, then keeled over, concussed by the beatdown he'd received from the vamp. Maz dropped the broken spear and looked around him, gauging their efforts. None of the guards were still standing, and as he watched, Taylor used a vicious kick to knock out the final dev. Maz motioned to his companions to follow him through the gates. They gathered close, slinking inside and quickly ducking down an alleyway. The streets were strangely empty, but Maz could feel eyes on them. "We need to hide, to find somewhere to regroup. They're going to be looking for—" A squeaky horn rang out through the night, and Maz flinched. "Too late." Phaedra pointed in the direction of an open doorway, then set off toward it, the women following. Maz brought up the rear, his head looking both ways while he skirted across the street. He was just about to step through the doorway when something snorted from behind him. Maz turned around, but before he could discover what was stalking him, he was felled by a blow to the head. The world went dark around him. Chapter 6. The sound of the lake lapping gently at the shore relaxed her, making her feel like there wasn't a care in the world strong enough to worry her now. Above her, the stars filled the Wisconsin night sky. Below her, soft grasses cradled her while she gazed up at them, smiling as a shooting star streaked across her field of vision. Hollie wondered idly if her father was still sitting by the campfire, or if he'd found his way into his tent yet. She couldn't hear his snoring, so she assumed he was still sitting by the fire. Although he insisted fishing was the best part about their campouts on the lake,
She secretly thought that he liked watching over the fire more. "What is it about men and tending fire?" she asked herself out loud. "I don't see what the big deal is about all that soot and smoke." "You might change your tune if you were trapped in the darkness without a light." The voice came out of nowhere, and Hollie sat up in a hurry, peering off into the woods in the direction the voice had come from. "Who's out there?" "I am." The words came from the other side of her, and she whirled around to see a figure in black standing beside her. Hollie skittered backwards, then came to her feet, ready to flee. Then she recognized the figure's features. "Maz? What are you doing here?" "Where is here?" he asked, then let out a groan and touched his head gingerly. "Never mind. I know where we are. The world of dreams." World of dreams? Hollie looked around at her, at the idyllic land bathed in moonlight, at the quiet trees shifting gently in the wind, and back up at the sky full of stars. "I'm dreaming. No wonder everything is so peaceful." "How did we get here?" she asked, confused. "The last thing I remember, I was having a glass of something that tasted like a combination of iced coffee and strawberry lemonade." "Well, I can't speak for you, but I believe I got here thanks to a hard knock on the head." He lowered his hands and peered at her, relief writ large on his features. "I must say I'm delighted to find you unharmed." The vampire took a couple steps toward her, his arms outstretched. Hollie matched his steps, but in the opposite direction, maintaining the distance between them. Although she was relieved to find Maz alive and well, the awkwardness of what had passed between them still lingered. "He tried to bite me, after all. That's not something I can easily forgive." She saw a look of disappointment flash across his handsome features, but he quickly hid it. Looking around them for a beat, he then spoke gently. "Is this where you are in the waking world?" he asked, adding, "It looks nice." "I wish I was here," she replied softly. "But I'm in some realm called Bellefonte. Do you know it?" Maz shook his head. "It does not look like this, then." "No, it's hard to explain." Hollie went on to share a description of the realm and its technological wonders. She told him about Dallin's aims, about the Techno-Mage's workshop, and even about Windy Buckets. "He's planning to get in contact with Ahriman somehow." "We cannot let that happen," Maz said, his voice like frozen gravel. "I'm not sure what I can do about it," she countered. "What we can do about it," he corrected, "because there's no way I'm letting Ahriman get his hands on you." "How can you stop him? You don't even know where Bellefonte is." "A situation I will remedy just as soon as I wake. I might not know it, but your friends likely do." "My friends? What do you mean?" She'd left a very angry Phaedra behind at the tavern with Cass and Taylor. The Fae detested Maz, so Hollie was fairly certain that wasn't the friends he was talking about. Her jaw dropped when she discovered how wrong she was. "After you vanished, I returned to the tavern to speak to your companions. I convinced them to team up with me to find you, to rescue you." Hollie sat down hard, glad that the grass was soft enough to cushion her behind. "You convinced Phaedra to work with you? What possessed you to try?" "I didn't have much choice. Every time I've followed my own instincts with you, it has ended up in catastrophe. I figured I'd better try another tactic this time. The stakes are too high to risk making another mistake." His answer surprised her, filling her chest with warmth. She tried to ignore the feeling. "How in the world did you convince Phaedra to go along?" Maz sat down elegantly, crossing his long legs and fixing her with a grin that barely exposed the tips of his fangs. "It wasn't easy. I had to agree to follow her orders." "I bet that's killing you," she said, unable to hold back the humor in her voice. "It is, almost literally," he said, then told her about the deaf guards and their fight at the gate of Acutix. "She is brave, very brave, but she doesn't always practice good sense." "You can say that again," Hollie said, and this time she did laugh.
She could feel some of the hostility she'd been holding on to start to fade. He teamed up with a woman who actively hates him just to go after me. It was touching, she had to admit.
"Are you still on Ahmadabad?" she asked, swallowing past the lump that had risen in her throat.
"I'm not sure," he admitted. "Someone must have knocked me unconscious, because the next thing I know, I'm walking through the woods following the sound of your voice." Out of questions for the moment, Hollie fell silent. It was dark, but there was enough light from the moon and starts to see the vampire's features clearly. He was looking at her, expressionless. The weight of his gaze was heavy. So much hung between them. Fear, desire, betrayal, need. Something must have entered her face, because Maz leaned forward to take her hand. "I will find you. Fret not, Dumpling. Now that I know where you are, I'll insist that we head to Belafonte immediately." His sincerity moved her, making it harder to keep the wall up between them. Only the memory of his fangs at her neck allowed her to continue to keep him at bay emotionally. Hollie wrapped herself in righteous anger, telling herself that she could work with the vampire to free herself from the imp, but afterwards she would insist on them going their separate ways. As if he could read her mind, Maz tilted his head and fixed her with a sympathetic look. "I know you are still upset with me over what happened in the bubble, and I repeat, it was a momentary lapse. It will not happen again." She'd been hoping to avoid this conversation, but it seemed she wasn't going to be that lucky. If we're going to dig into this, then let's dig.
"You want it to happen, though. You crave it, don't you?"
"It is my nature," he admitted with a shrug of one shoulder, "and the nature of matehood."
"That's what you say," she replied. "But I only have your word to go off of. Where I'm from, people exchange wedding rings, not bite marks."
"I will drown you in rings and necklaces and whatever bubbles strike your fancy if that is what you want," he promised.
"You missed my point, or avoided it on purpose. Explain it to me. Why is biting a part of matehood? And how do you know that's how it would be between us?"
She didn't bother stating again that she didn't believe she was his mate. Hollie was now confident that nothing would convince the vampire of that at this late stage. "It is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it," he told her. "Our blood attracts one another, as I told you. When mates are together, it is as if their blood is singing a duet. We will understand each other in a way that is indescribable. When our blood intermingles, we will both become stronger, and there will be no way for you to doubt my feelings for you, because you'll feel it deep within your being."
"Enough,"
she whimpered, not wanting to contemplate the kind of intimacy he was talking about. She'd lost her mother as a young teen, and her father only recently. The thought of loving someone as much as she'd loved them was dangerous.
"If I love them, I inevitably lose them. I can't take another loss like that."
"Of course," he replied softly. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Grief manifested itself as anger, Hollie resorting to the emotion to keep her vulnerability shielded.
"You talk about things in these abstract metaphysical terms, but what about the strictly physical? You'd be feeding off my blood, like a parasite, wouldn't you?"
No, not like a parasite," he insisted. "As mates, we would share with each other. I would taste you, and you would—"
"I most certainly would not," she interrupted. "I'm sorry, but I'm just a normal human girl, one who wants to do normal things. Lazy Saturday mornings lingering in bed, gardening on Sunday, a white picket fence, a family. Normality."
Her voice lost a little hardness as she added,
"That's something you can't give me."
His expression closed, and Maz looked away. "I understand. Before I saw you, I had resigned myself to a normal life, at least normal for someone in my position. But life had other plans for me, for us, and some day you will accept that." He stood looking down at her with an unreadable expression. "If I am to find you, I'll need to return to the waking world and convince Phaedra to change course. That is, if I don't wake up to find myself bound in silver chains, waiting for the sun to rise and immolate me. Good luck, was the only thing that came out of her mouth. Maz gave a little bow, then vanished. As she stared into the empty space that had a moment ago contained the oversized, handsomely made figure of the vampire, a trickle of loneliness seeped into her, the warmth that he'd recently engendered there receding. Hollie sat there for a long time, listening to the waves and waiting for calm to descend on her once more. Calm was a long time coming. Chapter 7. Hollie rolled over at the rhythmic beeping sound invading her dream, extending her arm and searching for the nightstand where her alarm sat. The trouble was, she wasn't in her bed back in Watoma, but balanced on a slender divan, so her arm hit nothing but air. Overbalancing, she slid off the low armless sofa and opened her eyes to stare at an unfamiliar ceiling. Oh yeah, I'm in Gresh's workshop on a world full of wonders and one annoying imp who wants to trade me to a monster for his freedom. The frosted dome of the little red robot appeared in her field of vision, and Hollie realized the beeps were coming from him and not a phantom alarm clock.
My apologies for waking you, but we are being summoned. Are you all right?
Never better, she croaked, then sat up and looked around. Consciousness wasn't coming back so easily. What happened?
You fell,
the bot said simply. I meant last night. Hollie pulled herself to her feet, then caught sight of the tray containing some pieces of cheese, a couple cracker crumbs, the rind of something that resembled a turquoise apple, and the empty glass of liquid she'd recalled in her dream.
You devoured the refreshments provided, then mumbled something about pulling something called an all-nighter again before falling asleep.
When she asked how long she'd slept, he replied in an exact fashion.
7 hours, 16 minutes, 35.3 seconds.
And you stayed here all the time? Hollie recalled her dream and the conversation with Maz that had taken place. The vampire never seemed to have an issue finding her dreams and pushing his way into them, but for once her dream hadn't turned into a nightmare.
Affirmative. I always follow protocol.
That's right, Hollie mumbled, bending to retrieve one of the remaining hunks of cheese and toss it into her mouth. She remembered now that Gresh had ordered the bot not to leave her side. Still, I'm surprised Dallin let me out of his sight for that long. The bites of cheese only made her hungrier, and she was about to suggest rustling up some breakfast when she caught sight of herself in the mirror. I look a fright, she thought, wondering if she smelled as bad as she looked. Her hair was ratty, her dress streaked with dirt, and it seemed a very long time since her last bath back in the Fae realm. I don't suppose you have a place where I can clean up, she asked Wendy.
Right this way,
he told her, then rolled to the archway that separated the sitting room from a larger chamber that included a small dining table and an attached powder room. The door to the hall whooshed open as they approached, and Hollie followed the bot into the corridor. They wound around a corner, climbed a half-flight of stairs, walked the length of 2 hallways, took a short ramp down, then entered a room tiled in colorful patterns. It wasn't very large, and was entirely empty.
When you're ready, you'll step into the circle,
Wendy told her, his little white hand indicating a white disk in the center of the room about 2 feet in diameter. Then his little hands moved to the sides of his dome as if to cover his ears. What happens when I step on the disc? Hollie asked, suddenly cagey. She knew this world was a strange mix of old and new, and the technology here wasn't like what she was used to back on Earth. Wendy removed his hands from his dome and answered.
You'll be buffeted by gentle sonic waves that will displace the grime from your person, attracting it to the disc, where it can then be sucked into the workshop's waste system, he told her, then put his hands back where they'd been a moment ago. Taking a deep breath, Hollie stepped forward onto the disc. The room filled with a gentle glow, and she felt the slightest sensation of air against her skin. It only took a couple moments before the glow subsided. Am I done? She asked, confused.
Hands back at his sides, Wendy rolled forward.
I should say so,
he replied, pointing down at the disc she was standing on. She took a step off and looked down, then let out a gasp of surprise. The once white disc was now brown with the dirt and debris it had removed from her person.
Feel better now?
He asked. I do, she nodded. That's a handy device. I don't suppose you have an extra I can take with me when I leave.
All devices employed in the workshop are proprietary technology, not for distribution outside the workshop without the proper...
Right, Hollie interrupted, patting the robot on the shoulder. It's not for noobs like me.
Noobs?
Wendy said, trying the word on for size. He must have liked the way it sounded because he repeated it several times in a sing-song way before asking her for the definition. Hollie explained, the conversation becoming her personal takes on various earth slang terms while they returned to the corridor and began winding their way through the maze of hallways and chambers. But
why do they say your eyebrows are oblique if it isn't a position at all?
Wendy was asking when they entered a light-filled chamber with tall ceilings that were lined with windows. A few feet beneath the center windows hung a crystal the size of Hollie's head, reflecting the light from the windows and making it dance around the room. I don't know, Hollie replied to the bot's question, her eyes finding the imp where he stood next to Gresh, who was winding the crank on a mechanical device that reminded her of a giant gramophone. At the opening of the door, Dallin turned around and motioned her over. It's about time you arrived, he said testily. Where exactly did you get off to for so many hours? And not feeling like she owed her captor any answers, Hollie shrugged, ignoring his disapproving gaze. What's that thing?
This thing, young lady,
Gresh replied in a rough voice,
is an interplanar holistic omnidirectional network encoder. We call it an iPhone for short,
Wendy provided, and Hollie's eyes widened before she burst out laughing.
Well, that's no way to react to a sophisticated piece of technology like this, the technomage sniffed. Especially when you haven't even seen what it can do yet.
Gresh pressed a button, setting an engraved metal disc spinning in the base of the contraption. A hum filled the chamber, but instead of words or music coming from the large, stylized horn that was aimed toward the ceiling, a beam of light shot from the device. The light beam reflected off the windows, one beam becoming many that somehow converged into a single beam again when they hit the dangling crystal hanging above them. That single beam was cast back toward them, resolving itself into a rectangle of light about 3 feet long and 2 high facing them.
Here we go,
Gresh said, then began fiddling with the knobs on the base of the device.
We should be able to... there we are.
The image started to waver, random shapes appearing. Dallin took a few steps toward the makeshift screen. Is this how you're going to talk to the prince?
No, Gresh countered. This is how you're going to talk to him. I'm not the one who's asking for favors here. I don't want anything to get in the way of my very lucrative business with Araman. Those riches help fund my experiments.
Dallin swallowed hard. As you say, but... His statement was cut off when the screen crackled, and an image replaced the floating shapes. At first, it was too dark to see anything much but a shadowy figure, but it soon resolved itself into a strikingly handsome gentleman with hard eyes. Well, this is unexpected, the man said, his gaze taking in the scene before him. While he watched them, Hollie put a name to the face. So this is Armand, the man that everyone seems to fear. He didn't look too sinister at the moment. His light brown hair had golden highlights that matched his eyes. Those eyes had a slightly feline cast, his thick, shaggy hair giving him a leonine air. Hollie had to remind herself that, despite the attractiveness, he was a member of the Princes of Darkness, and even Maz seemed to respect and fear him. When his eyes landed on her, Hollie shivered, shrinking back to hide behind Dallin's shoulder. Someone went through quite a lot of effort to make this square of light appear in my personal bedchamber. Armand announced after he'd finished his inspection. "Care to tell me what has prompted this interruption into my evening routine?" "1,000 pardons, Your Eminence," Dallin replied, laying the charm on as thick as frosting on a cupcake. "I'm afraid I assumed this would be the best method of contacting you without disturbing you in your palace. I know you prize your privacy." "Indeed," Armand replied mildly. The prince looked him over. "You have an air of familiarity about you, but I can't recall your name." "Dallin, at your service," the imp replied with a bow. "Although you're likely more familiar with this form." A puff of black smoke appeared, obscuring him, and when it cleared, Hollie had to hold back a scream at the transformation. His formerly attractive, human-like appearance was gone, replaced by cracked black skin that looked as if it were traced by lava. A pointy whip-like tail thrashed around nervously behind him, and a pair of small horns had sprouted from his craggy forehead. "I find it easier to make my way in the world in a more palatable disguise." "I remember you now," Armand said, all pretense of politeness vanished. "And you must be desperate to attempt to contact me. I still haven't forgotten the little prank you helped my brother play on me." "Forgiveness, please," Dallin asked, dropping to his knees, his goat-like hooves clicking against the stone floor in the process. "I had no choice. Samael gives the orders, and I am helpless but to follow them." "What do you want, imp?" The prince's tone was as brittle as broken glass. "I have something for you. Something I know you want." Dallin climbed to his feet and hurried over to Hollie, who'd crept back until she was crouching behind Gresh. The imp grabbed her by the arm and dragged her front and center before the screen. "She's pretty," Armand replied, brows furrowed. "But I already have several humans in my collection." "This one isn't just any human," Dallin said as Hollie cringed away from his ink-colored gnarled hands. "You are familiar with Maz, Samael's right-hand vampire? This is his mate." The prince's eyes widened, and the shadow of a smile crossed his full lips. "Now that is a treasure worth investigating. Bring her to my keep, and perhaps we can make a deal." Dallin's expression faltered. "With all due respect, Your Magnificence, I would prefer to meet on neutral ground. I know the value of my prize, and I would like to make certain that I see its full potential." Armand cocked an eyebrow, thinking it over. "Your price will be very dear, I take it." The imp nodded. "I want out from under your brother's thumb." "That is a tall order, imp." The grin on the prince's face showed that there was something he liked about the situation. "My brother doesn't like to lose one of his precious playthings." "Which is why I know you'll be delighted to be the one to deprive him," Dallin replied smoothly, earning him a laugh from the prince. "Okay, you've piqued my interest," Armand told him. "Bring the human to Nyx in 10 hours. I'll meet you there." "Nyx it is," Dallin replied, "but I'll need an unbreakable oath that you'll release me from the curse that binds me to your brother when I turn her over." Armand stared at him, then nodded. 10 hours. The screen went blank, and Gresh released the crank. The hum ceased, filling the chamber with silence until Dallin let out a whoop of elation. 10 hours from now, and I will have my freedom at last." The lava-filled cracks in his black skin knitted themselves back together, the tail shrinking until it was out of sight, his skin lightened, hair sprouting over the place where horns had been a second ago. Before long, Dallin was back to the man she'd met as Jude, but Hollie would never forget what ugliness lurked under his disguise. While the imp jumped for joy, Hollie felt her stomach drop. It seemed that the deal was a foregone conclusion. Before long, she'd be in the prince's clutches, doomed to join his collection for the rest of eternity. And I thought being trapped in Watoma for the rest of my life was bad. Escape was the only hope she had, but the window on that was closing, especially now that she had not one but 2 guardians dogging her steps. I'd give anything to be back on the lake now, she thought, remembering the dream of an hour ago, wishing on falling stars. But Hollie was old enough now to realize that wishes did not have a habit of coming true. Chapter 8. "This calls for celebration," Dallin yelled, appearing at Gresh's side to pat the old man on the back. "Please tell me you still have that bottle of Atlantean wine that you've been saving for a special occasion."
"I do, but this is not that occasion," Gresh grumbled. "Still, I'm sure that I have something that suits."
The technomage abandoned his device and headed for the door, the imp following close behind. Wendy stood beside Hollie, following the protocol Gresh had installed. Letting out a sigh, she fell into step behind the pair, feeling defeated. While Dallin joked with the old man, Hollie sorted through and discarded various escape attempt scenarios. Then she remembered how the bot had responded when they'd first arrived, and she'd asked for a means of traveling off-world.
"Hey, Wendy,"
she said softly, slowing her steps down to put some additional distance between herself and her companions.
"You mentioned before that the workshop might have some means of leaving the realm." "Affirmative," the bot replied. "But I must remind you that my protocol now states that I will not allow you to escape the workshop."
"Right," Hollie said, glossing over that point. "Could you show me what you mean? I'm a bit of a portal connoisseur, you could say."
"Of course,"
Wendy said, stopping his pace to turn around and backtrack.
"The infinity projection is this way."
With one last glance at her companions, who were turning a corner in the corridor ahead, oblivious to her and Wendy's whereabouts, Hollie moved to follow the robot. It didn't take long for her to be truly lost. They trekked up and down through winding corridors, downstairs and up spiraling ramps until Hollie had no idea what floor they were on. "What's an infinite projection?" she asked while they walked. "Is that what you call a portal here?"
"In a manner of speaking," the bot explained, "most portals are bilocated, meaning they join two specific fixed points in space. However, Gresh considers bilocated portals to be passé, so he created a system of interconnected passages through time that have the ability to lock on to an infinite number of points in space and connect them so that one can cross over from place to place."
"Sounds fancy," Hollie said, mostly because she couldn't think of anything else to say. "So, hypothetically, I could use this projecting thingy to travel from Bellefonte to anywhere else in the web?"
"Correct,"
Wendy said, with what sounded like pride in his voice.
"It took quite some doing to figure out the mathematics to build the projection. I was doing calculations for almost a month straight just to determine one setting on the rotor dial."
Hollie made a noise that indicated she was impressed. "Is the projection easy to use?" she asked, hoping she'd find a way to distract the little bot and make an escape.
"Of course, as long as you're able to calculate Spannerman's spatial efficiency quotient to the 18th power on the fly."
"That sounds complicated," she said, hope starting to flood out of her system. "I don't suppose there's some sort of cheat for that?" Wendy made a melodic series of beeps that resembled laughter.
"I haven't spent much time around humans before," he told her,
a series of pink lights going off inside his dome.
"I never imagined your species to be so charming."
"Thanks, Wendy," Hollie said, a genuine grin appearing on her face. "Although I can't say I'm excited to be held prisoner here. At least, you're a very friendly prison guard." This caused another series of beeps and more flashing lights.
"Here we are,"
he announced finally when they came to a stop in front of a nondescript door marked with a symbol that reminded Hollie of the brainstorm mats they used to make before writing an essay in high school. Unlike the other doors they'd encountered, this one didn't slide open automatically. Wendy pressed his small white hand to the door's surface, causing it to open.
"Quickly,"
he told her, motioning her inside.
"If the door's open for too long, the projection recalibrates, and soon we'll have model universes spilling out into the hall."
Hollie did as he bid her, jumping into the chamber before getting a good look at what lay inside. When the door was shut again, she turned to face infinity. "Wow!" was all she could say, the word coming out of her without warning. The chamber seemed to stretch on endlessly, crowded by tiny points of light that seemed to revolve and spin around one another. "What is this place?"
"The infinity projection. I already told you."
Wendy wheeled forward, and Hollie noticed that the lights rotated out of his path so that none touched him as he progressed. She followed after him, keeping an eye on the little lights that seemed to dance with their own rhythm. She wasn't sure how far they'd gone because when she looked back, the distance behind them seemed as infinite as it did in front of them. Without warning, Wendy stopped, announcing that they'd reached their destination. "We have?" The random point he'd chosen to pause looked no different than any other spot in the room. Another series of laughing beeps followed before she saw Wendy's right arm extend out of his body, reaching about a foot in front of him, where he began to make a complex series of motions. There was a loud click, and suddenly they were lifted into the air, the floor beneath them starting to rise. Hollie moved closer to the bot, steadying herself. The platform rose about 10 feet into the air, then stopped. It rotated a half-turn and froze again.
"Right,"
Wendy said, looking up at her, then rattled off a warning.
"This is the Infinity Projection, a product of Gresh Enterprises and under trademark, copyright, and patent in over 17,000 realms. Infringement on this intellectual property of Gresh Enterprises is punishable by fines, jail time, and possible disintegration."
"Right," Hollie said with a serious nod. "Let's avoid that disintegration if we can." She stood there silently for a moment, waiting for Wendy to speak until she realized he was doing the same thing. "So, is Earth somewhere in this projection thingy?"
"Earth,"
Wendy said.
"home to billions of members of the human species, as well as trillions of mammals, fish, and insects, and a fair number of off-worlders, although most humans don't realize that fact."
His arms rose again, and he began his motions again, causing the lights in the room to start to spin in dizzying patterns. She had to look away or risk throwing up all over herself. Wendy finished his movements, and the spinning stopped. One of the dancing lights, this one giving off a faint blue pulse, came closer and began to grow until she realized it was a miniature version of her planet. She leaned in closer to peer at it, feeling like an astronaut grown to immense proportions, floating in the expanse of outer space. "That's Earth," she said, delighted. "So how do we get me in there?" she asked, pointing.
"It's an instantaneous process once the correct code is entered. You see, all particles in the multiverse vibrate along certain frequencies. If one knows the frequencies in question, one can extrapolate the vectors that allow interdimensional travel by calculating the coefficient of the web's infinite curvature against."
The bot's words continued on, but Hollie's understanding of the terms didn't. She listened patiently as he gave her a complicated walkthrough of the process full of scientific jargon that she couldn't understand. When he finished at last, she gave him a nod and a clueless smile. "And all of that means I can travel from this workshop to Earth via this machine?"
"Yes," Wendy said, "provided you enter the appropriate code."
"Fantastic," Hollie said, clapping her hands with enthusiasm. "So let's plug in the code and have a go at it."
"I'm sorry, but I can't do that,"
the bot replied. Her grin faded. "Right, your protocol. I'm not saying we go anywhere. I just want to see what happens is all." A needle of guilt pricked her for the lie, since she had every intention of crossing through the projection if given the slightest chance. Still, this is my best chance of escape, and I'm sure Wendy would forgive me if the shoe was on the other foot or wheel.
"It's not that,"
Wendy said, his arm retracting back into his small body.
"Each of the locations open for travel through the projection has been programmed with an independent access code. Gresh is the only one with those codes."
"Oh," Hollie said, some of the wind going out of her sails. "Well, do you know where he keeps them? Maybe we could borrow the one for Earth, just for demonstration purposes, of course."
"I'm afraid he's never shared the location of the codes with me. Some of us bots think it's to keep us from leaving the workshop on our own."
"That doesn't sound fair," Hollie said, sidling closer. "You said yourself that it took you a month to figure out one calculation. I'm sure you and the other bots helped Gresh build this thing. It's not fair that he gets all the credit and you can't even use the thing." A series of lights set off flashing inside Wendy's dome.
"A few of us bots share your opinion," he admitted quietly. "But Gresh is the creator, the arch programmer. We run off his protocols."
"Surely a smart bot like you could live by your own protocols. You don't need some old man to run your life, do you?" Wendy didn't answer for a minute, and Hollie thought she'd overstepped her bounds. Look at me, trying to be some sort of robot union organizer and rabble-rouser. Anything to get home, I guess. Finally, the robot's arm extended and started writing on the air again. The light spun in all directions as the platform returned to the floor.
Let's check Gresh's office for the codes. I've got some ideas as to where they might be hidden.
Inside, she was cheering, but Hollie schooled her expression and followed the robot, looking down at her feet as she walked so as not to get dizzy from twirling, whirling lights. She scooted through the door swiftly when he opened it, then followed him down the corridor after he'd shut and locked it. "Have you ever traveled via projection?" she asked as they made their way up a stairway with tiny, narrow steps that spiraled through a stone hallway. Wendy was using his jets to propel him upwards while she climbed.
I have, although not as often as I would like. Gresh keeps us all at the workshop, busy cranking out his inventions. He did take me with him on a resupply mission once to Ecclebert 4, but I think it was more threat than reward.
She listened as the bot told his tale of being taken through the projection to a steamy jungle world.
I was afraid my joints would seize up in the humidity. He dragged me to a village where the people resembled snakes and tossed me down in a hut belonging to their chieftain. He was trying to get back at me for making an error in mass calculations earlier that week. Gresh accused me of not paying attention, of needing a vacation, hence the trip. Really, he was threatening to trade me to the chieftain's third wife.
"What happened?" she asked in a hushed tone as they reached the top of the stairs and set down a hallway, passing a pair of male figures in leather aprons who were walking on either side of a robot that made its way on a tripod of legs.
The snake woman attempted to pick me up, so I flashed a bright light in her face while simultaneously superheating my external panels. The changes in light and temperature startled her into dropping me. She hissed and slithered away. Gresh decided I was clever enough to retain my position in his workshop and brought me back home.
"Snake people, huh?" Hollie pondered. "Now I have a million questions. Do they have forked tongues? Did she have legs, or do they just, lift themselves on their coiled bodies? And could she unhinge her jaw? What about—" Her litany of questions was interrupted by the sound of whispers from the corridor they were passing. For Hollie, the noise didn't register, but Wendy stopped and turned to peer down the dim hallway. "Who's there?" Hollie froze, her pulse speeding up. So much for our little caper, she thought. Are we caught before we even begin? Chapter 9. A figure rushed out of the dimness, footsteps ringing out against the wood floor.
I hadn't realized how late it was,
a feminine voice said just as the figure reached the light. She was tall and slender, with raven black hair and eyes to match. Soot was smudged on her lily-white face, and she was wearing a leather apron.
What are you doing back there?
Wendy asked the woman when she came to a stop before them. Working, the woman said with a sniff, then fixed Hollie with a smile and rubbed her stomach.
Working for too long without a break. I'm starving. Who are you? Wendy demanded. I haven't seen you around the workshop before.
The woman arched a perfectly formed eyebrow in the robot's direction. She addressed her reply to Hollie.
I'm Nev, a new apprentice. I was just about to head out into the city to get some dinner. Care to join?
Before she could respond, Wendy let out a series of irritated beeps.
I'm senior floor manager,
he told the woman stiffly, his pride pricked by her treatment.
And I know all the apprentices in the workshop.
Do you? Nev replied mildly. Maybe Gresh forgot to inform his senior ball mapper about his newest one. It was clear that the new apprentice felt nothing but disdain for the bot. Wendy sputtered, red lights going off inside his dome. His anger moderated. He spoke again.
I suppose it is possible that we haven't been introduced. The boss does have a tendency to go through apprentices pretty quickly.
Precisely, Nev said with a nod, then looped her arm through Hollie's.
Are you new here too?
You really must get one of these aprons or you'll ruin your pretty dress. I'm not an apprentice, Hollie said, letting the woman guide her off down the hallway. I'm more of a visitor, just temporary. A visitor, Nev laughed. What in the web would bring a visitor like you to old Gresh's workshop?
Now you're the one asking questions,
Wendy grumbled from behind where he'd fallen into line behind them.
What project are you working on?
Nev ignored the bot's question. Do you like noodles? I know a place that does a tower of Tenkako that has the critics enraptured.
She cannot leave the workshop, Wendy piped up. And you haven't answered any of my questions yet.
The woman sighed, then fixed Hollie with a conspiratorial glance.
Doesn't it seem like boys and bots are always bossing us around?
Hollie wasn't sure how to react to the stranger's sudden appearance or the way she'd swept them into her wake. Still, noodles did sound good.
I could eat,
Wendy groaned.
You know we can't leave. It's part of the protocol, and I have to comply.
The protocol, huh? Nev asked, giving Hollie a wink. Sounds serious.
It is,
Wendy argued.
A bot without a protocol is like an equation without an equal sign. Everybody knows that.
Did you know that? Nev asked Hollie, a grin flirting with her face. Hollie couldn't help but smile in reply. Nev's playful demeanor was a welcome change given the gravity of the situation. And she's promising to take me out of the workshop. Maybe she can help me get out of the realm entirely. It was a sudden decision, but Hollie figured it represented her best shot of escape. Certainly a better one than searching the massive workshop for projection code.
I'm not very good at math, she admitted with a laugh.
And the only robot I own is the one that cleans my floors.
Nev let out a high trill of laughter. I like you. What did you say your name was again?
I didn't, she corrected. I'm Hollie, traveler from Earth who's getting more and more homesick by the minute.
And I'm Wendy Buckets, senior floor manager. But you already knew that, the bot said, his tone testy. And we aren't going to leave the workshop because it would be a violation of
Yes, a violation of protocol, as you've already said, Nev said, rolling her eyes. But I think you're getting all worried for nothing. What Gresh doesn't know won't hurt him.
But he does know, Wendy pointed out. All entry and exit points in the workshop are monitored for IP control, of course. We can't have this tech falling into the wrong hands.
Heavens forbid someone gets a line of code that they haven't paid for, Nev grumbled. But you're worried over nothing. I know a way out that isn't monitored.
Impossible,
Wendy argued, but Nev stared him down. What's the matter? Worried that the senior floor manager doesn't know every way into and out of this workshop? Wendy didn't answer, but the lights in his dome were going gangbusters. Hollie bit her lip, a little concerned by the showdown between the two of them. She liked the little bot, and they'd forged a fast friendship, but she had to focus on her priorities, the highest of which was getting the heck away from Dallin before he could trade her to the prince.
So tell me, Hollie,
how does a visitor from Earth find her way to Gresh Farlet's Workshop of Wonders? Hollie wasn't sure how to answer the stranger's question. She didn't know who to trust, and divulging all the steps that had led up to her appearance on Bellefonte didn't sit right with her. In a roundabout way, you could say, she replied, but I won't be staying for long, especially if you can help me get out of here.
What project did you say you were working on?
Wendy cut in, his gumption back after being cowed by the woman's attitude.
I went over this week's roster of apprentices, and I didn't see anyone named Nev on the list.
Nev is a nickname, she replied flatly, then returned to her conversation with Hollie. I'm a bit of a traveler myself. Let's compare trips. Maybe we've been to some of the same places. Okay, Hollie said, unsure how it would play out. Well, first of all, have you been to Earth? Not for a long time, Nev admitted. I'm sure much has changed. Are your kind still building those step pyramids? She made a gesture in the air, her hands rising block by block, bringing to mind the ziggurats of ancient Babylon. Not so much anymore, Hollie said, keeping a straight face while wondering exactly how old the stranger beside her was. She doesn't look older than my age, but she's talking about Earth as it was thousands of years ago. Could Nev be as old as Maz? Or older? More than likely, they're able to travel through time as well as space, she told herself, feeling better. If they can travel through alternate dimensions, what's to say they couldn't go for a picnic among the dinosaurs? What about you? What interesting realms have you visited? Nev's tone was cheerful, but there was something in her eyes that made Hollie think she was extremely interested in her answer.
What is it short for?
This was from Wendy, who wasn't willing to give up his line of inquiry. What is what short for? Nev asked peevishly, having forgotten her earlier response.
Your nickname. What is Nev short for?
It's short for never interrupt me when I'm talking to someone else. She fixed the bot with a glare that could have frozen the corridor over. Nev turned back to Hollie, her expression clearing. Well, come on, girl. Where's the most exotic place you've ever been? Well, I'm a small-town girl at heart, Hollie said, feeling her way along. So, really, anywhere outside of Wisconsin is exotic to me. Wisconsin, is it? That certainly sounds exotic. What do they do in the realm of Wisconsin? Farm, mostly. A lot of dairy cows, Hollie laughed. Wisconsin isn't a realm of its own, even if I sometimes think Packers fans are their own breed. At Nev's blank stare, Hollie explained. Wisconsin is the part of Earth I'm from. I was just saying that I haven't traveled very widely, at least before recently.
I'm certain you weren't on the apprentice roster, Wendy piped up again. We should reroute to the Employee Standards Department. I want to check your credentials.
It's too late, Nev told him. We're here.
Here? Wendy asked, confusion in his voice. Where is here?
The exit I was telling you about, and see, it's unmonitored. Wendy let out a series of beeps that Hollie would have thought was laughter except for the hard edge.
You're mistaken. This isn't an exit at all. It's a supply closet, which means you're not authorized to be here, as I suspected. If you will just follow me.
A storage closet, huh? Nev said, reaching for the handle and twisting it. She opened the door to reveal a shaded threshold that led out into a small cobblestone courtyard. Looks like the senior floor manager got his wires crossed again.
This shouldn't be here, Wendy said in a shaky voice. It's an unauthorized exit.
Just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that it is unauthorized. Nev took a step through the doorway and out into the fresh air. It is a lovely day. What's the holdup, friends? Wendy used his jets to raise himself to Hollie's eye level.
You cannot leave the workshop. It's protocol.
Hollie felt bad for the little bot, but there was no way she was giving up the best chance of getting away from Dallin that she'd been offered yet. I'm sorry, Wendy, but I'm going.
You can't,
he said, his arm extending, his little hand grabbing onto her arm.
It isn't permitted. The protocol states that I cannot let you escape the workshop.
She's not escaping, Nev said in a matter-of-fact tone. We're going out to grab dinner. No big deal, windbag.
Windy, the bot corrected, and my semantic synapses tells me that you're splitting hairs.
Nev gave him a look, then marched back through the door and grabbed hold of Hollie's other arm. Let's go, she said, tugging her over the threshold and out of the workshop, dragging the bot along with her. On the other side, Hollie could feel the cool breeze on her cheek. Wendy's lights were going off again in his dome. It was clear the bot wasn't happy about the situation.
She shouldn't have been able to do that,
he said, as much to himself as to Hollie. The protocol is, will you please stop nattering on? Nev's tone was annoyed. I'd like to hear less about protocols and more about the Noodle Tower. You're not going to believe the flavor these little strings of delight pack. The apprentice guided Hollie down a path through a stand of orderly flowers that towered over a wrought iron gate. Wendy still hung off Hollie's other arm, his dome whirring as he looked right and left.
This shouldn't be here, he repeated. On the other side of the supply closet is Gresh's gymnasium and sauna. There's no way there could be an external wall in this location.
Sounds like you need to consult a map, friend, because we're outside. Nev charged through the gate, leading them out into a public street. From the position of the sun, it was somewhere in the afternoon. Hollie could feel a little headache coming on. I thought we got here yesterday afternoon. At least, I think it was yesterday. I slept almost 8 hours, so it should either be nighttime or early morning, right? Then again, maybe this realm has super long days or something. Why are you looking for a reason to doubt this? Her inner voice questioned. You're out of the workshop, away from Dallin. Now all you have to do is find a portal out of here and you'll be free. Free for the first time since this whole thing started. Where did you say those noodles were? Hollie asked with a grin, shoving her arm through Nev's once again. Follow me, the woman replied, setting off down the wide boulevard. Chapter 10.
I'll open a portal to the realm in question, but I'm not going in there with you.
Cass's voice had a tone of finality to it. Maz could tell that she was over their little adventure.
Come on, Cass, Taylor cajoled. If it weren't for you, we might not have made it out of Accutix alive. Your help is invaluable.
So is my life, Cass countered. And if I keep hanging around with you lot, chances are both my life and the help I provide will disappear. Coward, Maz heard the Fae warrior woman whisper under her breath. Then she pasted on a smile and sat down on the corner of the desk that served as a counter. You're more than a match for anything we might encounter.
Look how well you've done so far. Right, the other Fae agreed. You're well on your way to a 5-star review. 5-star review? Have you both lost your marbles? Cass shook her head, then opened the drawer in the desk of her messy storefront office and pulled out a dusty old grimoire. I'm just about tapped out as it is, she continued. My wand is kaput after that last close call. She took the twig out of her pocket and tossed it over her shoulder. You're the one hoping to bring in business, and a 5-star review from us would definitely put you on the map. Phaedra leaned in, her face as cheerful as Maz had ever seen it. I promise a personal testimonial that you can use in your ad campaign, and at least a half a dozen referrals. If those referrals lead to jobs like this one, I'm not interested. The witch blew the dust off the grimoire and cracked it open. As it is, I've got to dig spells out of this old thing. That's how bad things have gotten. But if I don't get a magical recharge, I'll be too weak to open a portal the size of a mouse hole. Taylor circled around the desk and put her hand on Cass's shoulder. I'm sorry that our current situation is so taxing, but it's really a testament to your abilities. You're a rock, and we can't go on without you. When the witch didn't answer, she patted her shoulder. I promise to make sure Phaedra writes that stellar review she promises, and we'll pay you double your initial fee, of course. Double? Cass scoffed. The circumstances of the deal are vastly different now. Double isn't near enough. I will personally pay you 10 times whatever they've offered, Maz said from the corner where he'd been leaning and watching the display. 20 times, 100 times, a queen's ransom. Help me get Hollie back, and you can name your price. Phaedra looked over her shoulder and scowled at him. Once we rescue Hollie, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure she stays far away from you. Maz ignored her, his gaze staying on the witch until she blushed and looked down. I appreciate the offers, all of you, Cass said, but I'm not going. Then so help me, I'll write the worst review in the history of reviews, and I'll hire a demon to spread the word through the entire multiverse. I won't rest until... Save it, Cass said, holding up a hand. Threats aren't going to work if a queen's ransom won't. Please, Cass, Taylor said, swiveling the witch's chair around to face her. We need you. A Fae's memory is long, and if you help us, it will be a debt not swiftly forgotten. That I pledge. You're never going to leave me alone if I don't agree, are you? Cass said at last with a heavy sigh. Correct, Phaedra said, hopping off her desk. So let's stop arguing and get going. She turned to Maz. What was the name of the realm again? Bifanta? Belafonte, he corrected. Right. Can you take us there, Cass? The warrior Fae was already tapping her toe with impatience. The witch stood and crossed over to a large bookshelf where books and scrolls were stashed haphazardly, some with spines out, others with spines in, some lying horizontally, some vertical, and all of them cluttered and disorganized. Ah, she said after searching for a moment, the World's Wide Web Compendium. The book she selected was as slender as a pamphlet, but when she opened it, it unfolded once, then twice, then again and again, until it was the size of one of the shop's walls. Here it is, Cass said from behind it. Belafonte. No known restrictions, entry requirements, or traps. She dropped the now massive thing, and it folded itself and placed itself back on the shelf. I'm going to need a moment to cast an energy recharge and set precise coordinates. Be right back. The witch snatched the grimoire off her desk and pushed her way through a door to the back of the shop. Maz's impatience at the wait matched Phaedra's, and he watched as the Fae began to pace. He tried to center himself, but the longer he went without his mate, the crazier he felt. The vampire was grateful for the stolen interlude they'd managed a few hours ago, but their brief exchange had only whetted his appetite. Maz longed for the day that she would be all his, that he'd wake beside her, that they'd spent hours discovering everything about one another. The longer he had to wait for that day, the more agitated he felt. At last the witch was ready. I have a feeling I'm going to regret this, she said before using her feet to kick away the refuse and scattered objects that covered the floor of the jumbled shop. She knelt and drew a circle wide enough for the four of them to fit in, then ran her hands over the space until it began to ripple like water. In you go, she said, motioning them toward the portal. Phaedra strode straight to the circle, dramatically plugged her nose, then plunged in like a child jumping into a cool summer lake. She vanished, and Taylor motioned for Maz to go next. Without hesitation he did, leaping into the portal and passing through its surface, a burning sensation igniting over his skin. At first he thought he'd been exposed to the sun, but
They were still in the formlessness of the portal. The sensation flared to the point of agony. Then he passed through and tumbled to the ground, the burning gone. Maz was quick to make sure he was covered, skittering backward to rest in the shade beneath a tree. So far, his long coat and hat had kept him safe, but the daylight here already hurt his eyes. A moment later, Taylor and Cass dropped beside them, and the portal that had been hanging 6 feet in the air vanished.
"What was with the burning?"
Phaedra asked, picking herself and dusting herself off.
"That's never happened before."
"I don't know," Cass said, rubbing her arms and shivering. Then she froze.
"And I don't think I want to find out. There's something wrong here, something powerful and nasty."
"What are you talking about?" Maz asked on high alert. "Hollie said there was magic here, but nothing that had her worried."
"That's not surprising," Taylor pointed out. "Humans can't sense magic like other races can."
"I can't describe it," the witch said, her face screwing up as if she'd drunk curdled milk. "But it's deeply unnerving. The sooner we get out of here, the better." "Then let's go find Hollie," Phaedra said, motioning them forward. They'd landed in a small copse of trees that gave way to a shaded lane bordered by rustic-looking houses. "Did she tell you where she was in this realm?" she asked Maz. "In a city, one with technological wonders." He scanned the area, but all he could see was other houses and smaller buildings. "Give me a moment, and I'll get the lay of the land," he said, setting his sights on a low hill on the edge of town. In the blink of an eye, he traveled there and looked out into the distance. To the east, he could see spires reaching above the treetops, spires that seemed to span a couple miles. "A city." He blinked back to his companions. "I see a city several miles away, to the east." "Let's go," Phaedra said, setting off on foot until Maz called her back. Although he appreciated their wariness when it came to his powers, there was no time for them to walk everywhere when he could have them on the outskirts of the city in half a second. "Take my hands," he told them, "and I will get us there without delay. As the witch said, the sooner we're gone, the better." Taylor nodded and Cass looked convinced, but Phaedra turned up her nose at the offer. "We Fae are fleet of foot. We could be there before the sun sets." "We could be there now if you just stop being obstinate," he snapped, causing the Fae female to recoil. "Apologies for my impatience," he said after a moment, then motioned to the skin on his hands that was starting to smoke the longer he stayed in the sunlight. "We cannot afford to waste time for any reason." "Fine," Phaedra said at last, then grabbed his hand, which was starting to blister. The other women took his opposite hand, and Maz held on tightly to them. Then he traveled to the east faster than a bolt of lightning. Phaedra was quick to pull a hand out of his grip and wipe it on the leg of her tight pants. Taylor gave him a grateful nod, but the witch let out a cry of alarm. "It's stronger here, the foul magic, strong enough to make me nauseous." "Can you tell where it's coming from?" Taylor asked. Cass nodded and pointed in the direction of the source. "It's that way, less than a mile." "We should go that way," Taylor said, setting off in the direction of Cass's finger. Phaedra grabbed her fellow Fae and shook her head. "You're saying we should run toward the evil magic. Don't we generally try to avoid things like that? We should focus on retrieving Hollie and getting out of here." "Knowing Hollie, she's probably close to the source of this strange magic," Taylor pointed out. "There's got to be a connection." "She's right," Maz said, convinced. "We should follow the magic to its source." Phaedra let out a sigh, grumbling under her breath about losing control of the mob she was supposed to lead, but she fell in line behind Cass, who took off in the direction she'd pointed. Before long, they were standing before a large, misshapen building that looked like something a child had built. Maz was about to suggest they might have made a mistake when he caught a whiff of a familiar scent. His mouth started to water, and his muscles went rigid. "Hollie isn't there," he blurted, then rushed toward the building. He would have ripped open the door if Phaedra hadn't thrown herself in front of him. "Hang on, big guy," she said. "Maybe we shouldn't rush right into this situation, given that Cass is basically melting down right now." Maz's eyes shot to the witch, who'd gone so pale she was nearly translucent. He turned back to the face, scowling. "It was your bright idea to bluster your way into Accutix, and I followed orders there." "And I can admit now that the plan was flawed," she told him gently. "Or have you forgotten how it ended?" Maz recalled waking up from his stupor at the feet of a half-giant, half-orc, who'd been felled by the combined efforts of his companions. After they'd defeated the contingent of Dev, they'd stumbled on a horde of goblins led by the nastiest, ugliest creature he'd ever seen. It had been the half and half that had knocked him out, allowing him to find Hollie in her dream. The vampire growled, every instinct inside him clamoring for Hollie and the imp's blood, but he gave a nod and did not try to charge the door again. "What is your plan?" "A stakeout," Phaedra said, pointing to a dumpling cart a few yards away. "We'll have an unobstructed view of the door and whoever comes and goes." Cass was trembling and began vigorously shaking her head. "We shouldn't go in there. Can't you feel it?" Maz could feel nothing, and neither could the Fae, it seemed. He was about to argue when he felt like he'd been doused in ice water. Oh no, not now. A sickening whoosh, and he was gone, landing at the feet of the being he least wanted to see now. Samael stared down at him. "Where have you been?" Maz stood, recovering from his summoning and adopting a contrite tone. "Pursuing the imp. I just stumbled on his location when you pulled me back to Pluto." The Angel of Death's expression was skeptical. "What is taking so long? Are you sure you haven't gotten distracted by something?" Samael started to circle around him, his eyes stabbing at the vamp. "You're usually so punctual, yet this time I have to track you down if I want your reports. I apologize if I haven't been as efficient as you'd like. I've run into an issue in my pursuit of the imp. He seems to have come in contact with a very powerful magic user, someone I'm not sure I can best. The situation was under observation until you called me back." Samael stared at him, and for a moment Maz thought his master might accuse him of spinning falsehoods. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, shiny mirror with an ornately decorated backing in what appeared to be pure platinum. "Use that if you have to. It will allow you to reflect magic back to the caster. You can capture them with their own spell." "It should come in handy," Maz said gratefully, taking the mirror from him. "I want the imp," Samael said, his eyes cold. Maz nodded, then bowed his head. "It shall be as you command," he replied, even as a chill went through him. There was something about the prince, something in his expression that made him worry. Samael wasn't the most trustworthy of beings on his best day, and given the situation, Maz thought it was likely his boss had something up his sleeve. "Go," Samael said, motioning the vampire away, and Maz wasted no time traveling away a moment later, the tendril of doubt still niggling away in the back of his mind. Chapter 11. Hollie's spirits were higher than they had been in ages. They were actively moving away from her captor, and so far Dallin seemed none the wiser. He's either drunk or stuck into some sort of gambling. He should be betting on how quickly Aramon is going to double-cross him. There was something about the prince she didn't trust. Heck, more than one thing, the whole bunch of those so-called princes of darkness are as shady as a grove of oak trees. Still, she wouldn't feel bad for the imp if he got caught between two princes. He's made his own messy bed, and he can rot in it because I'm free. Nev smiled at her, then turned a corner, taking her down a street lined with small shops and restaurants. "Almost there."
"What quarter is this?"
Wendy asked, looking round.
"I've never seen these shops before."
Nev shrugged. "The South Quarter, I suppose."
"There is no South Quarter,"
Wendy said testily, then paused in front of a shop that seemed to sell magical items.
"That shop shouldn't be here,"
he said, pointing his little white hand at the display of candles, bells, and potion ingredients. "Maybe it's new," Hollie volunteered, but Wendy shook his head.
"Magical shops are outlawed per the 7th Constitution of the realm. No magical items should be sold for coin or exchanged for other goods or services without the express written permission of—"
"Do you ever shut up?" Nev spoke over him. "Why don't we just part ways, and you can go back to your precious workshop instead of hassling me?" Wendy made an angry beat.
"It is against protocol. I am not to leave Hollie's side until the protocol is reversed."
"I'd like to reverse your protocol myself," Nev grumbled, "starting with deleting your speech subroutines." "Where's the restaurant again?" Hollie asked, hoping to deflect the apprentice's anger. "Are we almost there?
We are, Nev replied, giving the robot a dirty look, then smiling at Hollie. It's just up ahead. You can see the flashing pile of noodles on the sign. What is this street called? Wendy asked, and Hollie was afraid that Nev was going to kick him into next week. Whisper Way, the apprentice said without missing a beat, her false cheer still in place. And before you ask, the restaurant is called Noodle Night. Never heard of the place, Wendy grunted. And there is no Whisper Way. I've been input with the self-updating map of the city, and there is no... Down here, Nev said, pointing to a dim alleyway. There's a back entrance off the kitchens. I know the chef, and he lets me eat in the back for free. The sun passed behind a cloud, and it was like the light and heat bled out of the world. Hollie shivered, not liking the look of that particular alley. I think we can just go in the front. I'm sure the noodles aren't that expensive. Nev laughed. Who are you to turn down free food? Some kind of empress or something? She put an arm around Hollie's shoulder and directed her toward the alley. There were scattered bits of filth and decaying food spilling out of the garbage cans lining the brick walls. Hollie tried to pause at the mouth of the alley, a sudden feeling of unease stopping her from moving forward. But at that moment a strong wind kicked up, sweeping her into the alley with its momentum. Wendy was right behind her, letting out a few frightened beeps. The moment they passed into the shadow between the two buildings, their surroundings suddenly shifted. The cheer of moments before was replaced instantly by a creeping fear intent on strangling her. Hollie pulled away from Nev and turned around, intent on backtracking, but what had been an opening to the street a moment before was now a dank stone wall. She spun around, realizing that walls were all around them now. They were no longer in an alley, but a dark, moldy chamber with chains hanging from the walls. The straw under her feet was matted with dirt and grime, and she could hear water dripping somewhere. "Where are we?" she croaked, realizing that she'd made a mistake. The chains on the walls shut out, suddenly wrapping themselves around her limbs and pulling her backwards until her back was pressed to the wall, her limbs locked up tight. Her eyes shot to the woman who'd led them here, and she gasped when she saw that their surroundings were not the only thing that had undergone a change. The simple leather apron Nev had been wearing was replaced by an ornate black lace dress that clung to her curves. Its black fur collar spread out over shapely shoulders, and a bustle sprang from the back. A hat concocted of black feathers and a delicate lace mesh perched on her head, the lace extending to cover her face, lending her features an air of mystery. The apprentice now had all the trappings of a fine, aristocratic lady, including the delicate giggles she made while clapping her elegant hands clad in black lace gloves. "That was easier than I expected," the woman said, save for one annoying bot. She shot a glance at Wendy, who was wrapped in chains of his own. "Next time, I'll be sure to short out your circuitry and make it look like an accident." Then she paused, a feral smile appearing behind the lace. "Wait a minute. There won't be a next time for you, will there?" "Who are you?" Wendy demanded with more courage than Hollie was feeling. "What is the meaning of this imprisonment?" "That's enough out of you," she replied, then waved a hand at the robot. He shook, but no sounds came from him. "That's better." Nev turned her attention back to Hollie, taking a few steps closer. "Now that we're finished with the interruptions, you and I can have that conversation I was hoping for." "Conversation?" Hollie summoned every ounce of bravado she had, attempting to keep the tremble out of her voice. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm not sure why you think I would cooperate now that you've chained us up and silenced my friend." "A friend?" Nev laughed. "You're talking about a mindless automaton. Besides, people like you don't deserve friends, do you?" "People like me? What are you talking about? You don't know me. We've never met before." Confusion clobbered her. What have I gotten mixed up in now? All because of my stupid stomach and my need for escape. Out of the frying pan and into the dungeon, I guess. "We have not met, but I know enough about you to know you're the one I'm looking for." The well-dressed lady reached into her pocket, pulling something out and holding it up for Hollie's inspection. "Look familiar?" Hollie squinted to see what it was she was holding. When she realized it was a single red hair, her eyebrows raised. "What in the heck is going on here? I asked you earlier about your travels, and you failed to mention one in particular, the one I was hoping to hear about." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Hollie said, completely dumbfounded. "Is that my hair?" "Why don't you tell me?" the woman said, putting the hair away and leaning in with a toothy grin. "Perhaps you can recall your trip to a little pocket dimension, one that didn't belong to you." Hollie shook her head, not sure what Nev was driving at. "I've only been to a handful of realms. This one, the Fae realm, Phalancia, Aramanabad. Is that so?" Nev steeped her hands. "You've been to Aramanabad? It seems the picture is becoming clearer." "What picture? I didn't choose to go there, just like I didn't choose any of the other realms, including this one. I was on the run from a vampire, and an imp captured me and brought me here. This sounds like quite an adventure, and I can't wait to hear all about it. First, let's talk about your time in the pocket dimension. Who admitted you to that realm?" "Admitted me to what realm?" Hollie's brain felt sluggish, fear messing with the firing of her brain synapses. "The pocket dimension," Nev replied tartly. "You know, the one you smashed up, unless you regularly run around laying waste to other people's property." Hollie's eyes widened as she suddenly realized what the woman was talking about. The memory of the hours spent alone with Maz, trapped in what they'd taken to calling their bubble, hit her with the force of a blow. It was her pocket realm. She understood in that moment, and she's here for revenge. "I think I can recall the realm in question," Hollie said quietly. "And can you recall how you came to be there? That realm was protected by every kind of hex, curse, and hiding spell in existence. So how is it that an unskilled human was able to penetrate the shield that a god might fail to?" "That I can't tell you," Hollie admitted. "The nearest we can figure, there was some sort of magical malfunctions. Spells were flying around, and they got mixed up somehow, and without warning, I ended up in your pocket dimension." For now, she made the decision to keep Maz's presence there a secret. There was no reason to drag the vampire into this if she could avoid it. The scrap of metal on stone drew their attention, and Hollie felt a stab of sadness at the state of the little robot, who was continuing to struggle against the chains. Nev dismissed him and returned her attention to her human captive. "A magical malfunction, huh? A likely story. Was a malfunction also responsible for the state of things after you were done? Or was there another reason you smashed my things?" "I didn't intend to make a mess," Hollie said sheepishly. "I was just trying to find my way out of there." She felt foolish, out of her depth. "If you'd like to file a report with your insurance company, I'm happy to make a statement." The woman stared at her coldly, shaking her head. "It's not that I'm without a sense of humor," she said after a moment. "I appreciate a joke just like anyone, but it tends not to be so funny when you're talking about a threat against myself and my family." "I'm not a threat," Hollie insisted. "It was pure coincidence that I ended up in your realm, and I swear to you that I mean neither you nor your family any harm." "Excuse me if I don't exactly believe you," Nev replied, hands on her hips. "You haven't been the most forthcoming, have you? And you destroyed my little dimension without so much as a note of an apology." Hollie knew that last bit was a sarcastic dig, but it did prompt her as intended. "I'm sorry, dreadfully sorry about the state I left your property in. If there is some way I can make it up to you, you only have to ask." "Oh, you're going to make it up to me. Don't worry," her captor said, rubbing her hands together. "In flesh and bone and blood. You will make it up to me with screams, begging and pleading." Nev took a step closer, close enough for Hollie to see the crazed look in her dark eyes. "You will pay for your trespass until there are no screams left." Chapter 12. "I hope you've learned by now to answer me truthfully and without delay." Nev tapped her chin with her index finger, studying the woman displayed before her. "I will know if you lie to me, so don't bother trying." "I won't lie," Hollie insisted, even as she racked her brain to think of a way to convince the dark lady that this was all some sort of misunderstanding. "I promise you that I mean you no harm. I don't even know who you are." "What were you doing in my realm?" Nev asked again. "Answer me true or face my wrath." "I told you. I ended up there by mistake, and all I was trying to do was find a way out. That is the truth.
A sudden shock went through her, making her muscles twitch. It was reminiscent of the shock she'd get when she walked across the carpet in her fuzzy socks that touched something metal. More surprising than painful, but it wasn't to stay that way.
Who are you working for? No one, Hollie said. I'm self-employed.
It was the truth, but Hollie realized it might come off as a smarmy joke. Nev, however, wasn't smiling. She shook her head, and a sudden shock went through Hollie, this one stronger than before. Hollie gritted her teeth, riding it out, then let out a heavy breath, going limp against the chains. She wasn't sure how many more questions she could survive, and she had a feeling they were only getting started.
Who told you about my realm?
Was the next question, and she wasn't surprised to receive yet another shock, this one a little harder, when she replied with the truth. No one told me about the realm, just like no one told me who you are or why you're filled with rage.
I'm sorry I messed up your pocket dimension, she croaked. If you transport me there, now I'd be happy to clean up and return everything to rights. I didn't have a chance to because my exit was as sudden as my entry.
Nev stared at her. How did you get out of the pocket dimension?
A witch rescued me. I'm not sure how she located me because I have no idea how magic works, but she managed to pierce the mirror walls, something I wasn't able to do on my own. She pulled me out. A witch.
Hollie held her breath, expecting a shock, but none came.
What witch? A witch I had hired to help protect me from a vampire stalker. We made a deal for her to cast a spell, but something went wrong and we had to flee. The vampire found us again, and that's when the magical mishap happened that landed me in your realm.
Nev tilted her head, fixing Hollie with a look of interest.
You seem to lead a charmed life for a human. Vampires, witches, flitting from realm to realm like a butterfly going from flower to flower. What makes you so special? I wish I knew,
Hollie answered honestly, but it earned her a shock, this one twice as hard as before. She grimaced, then answered in anger.
My mother used to say I was special because I could pat my head and rub my stomach at the same time.
One corner of Nev's lip turned up, and a shock with double the intensity ripped through Hollie, leaving her limp against the chains. The shocks hurt her body, but the question hurt her pride. What makes me so special? How did I end up embroiled in all of this trouble? All because one mixed-up vampire thinks I'm his mate.
Answer me,
the dark lady said, her patience starting to wear thin.
I'm not special,
Hollie spat.
Ahriman said it himself.
She was thinking about his dismissal of her before Dallin shared that she was Maz's alleged mate.
Ah, yes, Ahriman. You mentioned visiting Ahrimanabad earlier. How exactly do you know the Prince of Darkness?
The question was asked in a deceptively calm tone, but she could tell that Nev was carefully observing her, hanging on to her every word.
Not really. He's got something to do with the vampire stalking me. The imp seems to think Ahriman wants me for his collection, and he's planning to take me to him to spite the vamp. He tried before, took me all the way to Ahrimanabad, then lost me in a game of chance. This is his second attempt to trade me to the prince.
The shock that hit her this time was enough to make her teeth snap together, and she was relieved, when she could think again, that she hadn't bitten her own tongue off.
I'm not lying, she cried,
her limbs trembling with the aftershocks of the electricity.
Vampires and imps and the princes of darkness, all revolving around some simpering human female. Tell me another one. What do you want me to say?
Hollie knew she was reaching the limit of her strength to resist the level of shock she was receiving.
Just tell me what to say and I'll say it, since you're clearly not interested in the truth. I'm just supposed to trust your word with no corroboration.
I'm sorry, but I'm not in the habit of believing humans in their tall tales. You're little more than ants to me, selfish, brutish little ants, obsessed with your own little ant hills, never realizing there's a much larger world out there, with much more powerful beings who could squash you and not even realize it.
Wendy knows, Hollie said suddenly. Let him speak and he can tell you what he knows. So now the robot is your witness. Why should I believe him? Aren't robots not allowed to lie? Check his protocols, please.
Hollie was starting to dread the next shock. She'd managed to bear them thus far, but the next one was bound to be fierce enough to make her hair stand on end. Nev let out an annoyed breath, but she waved a hand at Wendy nonetheless. Limit your speaking to things that are relevant to the interrogation, she warned him. None of your whining and petulance about how this place can't exist, and I'm not supposed to be here. Nev gestured in Hollie's direction. Is what the human is saying true?
I can only speak to the pieces I have seen or heard with my own faculties,
Wendy croaked, his voice sounding stilted.
I have seen the imp she is talking about on multiple occasions, the latest being a few hours ago, when he contacted Ahriman and requested a trade, the human for his freedom.
Hollie saw a raven eyebrow arch under the lace veil. Why would Ahriman want this human?
To add to his collection, I believe. She is said to belong to a vampire who is lieutenant under the Angel of Death.
Samael! Nev hissed, her disdain for the prince broadcasting as if she'd screamed it through a megaphone.
Correct, Wendy stated. They've set up an exchange. The imp hands off the human, and the prince frees him from the curse that bonds him to Samael.
Nev's eyes narrowed. So you're backing up every word that she's said? She moved toward the bot and leaned over, looking closely at him. How am I to know you aren't telling me as many lies as she is?
I am not prone to lying,
Wendy replied stiffly, as if his character were being impunged. Have any protocols or subroutines been installed to prevent you from bending the truth, bot? Hollie held her breath as she waited for Wendy to answer the question. Surely Gresh has written a protocol for that. He can't have his mechanical servants running around telling bold-faced lies, can he?
No.
The word hung in the air between them, and Hollie's face fell. Well, there goes that. She braced herself for the next shock. The two of you must think yourselves very clever, coming up with this convoluted story about leeches and imps. What's next? Did a dragon fly you to the stars so you could collect them like berries from a tree? It's the truth, Hollie said, trying to keep the pleading out of her voice. You can see for yourself. Take us back to the workshop. Ask Gresh. He'll back up our story. Gresh is a dirty old man who's known for cheating those he considers more stupid than himself. I would trust him about as far as, well, I trust the pair of you. Ned straightened her veil and took a deep breath. We'll start from the beginning again. This is your last chance to get it right. You will tell me the truth, or you will beg me for death before we're finished. Please, you don't have to do this, Hollie begged, but Neb ignored her. How did you find my pocket dimension? Letting out a sigh, Hollie hung her head. I didn't find it. I was trapped there by mistake when some magical spells went wrong. The strength of the shock made her back arch off the wall, and she strained against her chains. It was agony, the rush of electricity making her feel like her nerve endings were on fire. I'm not sure how much more I can take. What were you looking for in my realm? A way out, Hollie replied, then flopped against the current that seemed to invade every cell of her body. Her eyes rolled back in her head, tongue lolling out of her mouth. Why did you tear the place apart? I thought if we could find a clue as to what the place was, maybe we could find a way out. The shock this time had her on the verge of passing out. One more and I might be done for. Why are you so interested in my twins? Hollie's eyes blinked open, and she focused her blurry gaze on the dog lady. Your twins? The hazy recollection of the images of twin boys they'd uncovered in the bubble rose in her mind. Wait, I remember now. We thought it might be some sort of clue, but we didn't know what they meant. Why do you insist on lying? There was an edge in Neb's voice that terrified her. There is no profit in it. I'm going to kill you either way, but it's up to you how long you suffer before the end. Please, Hollie said, her voice weak. I mean you no harm. I mean your children no harm. I just want to go home. You're never going home, Neb said. No one violates the sanctity of my realm and lives. Frustration filled her. From the look in Nev's eyes, she knew it was only a moment before the woman shocked her again. Again and again, until her body gave out at last. Hollie screamed then, in fear of what was to come, in defiance of the fate promised her. Her scream ended, and in the distance she heard an answering roar. She had a second to realize that the roar sounded familiar before the shock hit her. Exhausted, she succumbed to the unconsciousness it brought her, relieved to finally find an escape, even if it was in death.